Hey there, tonight we're exploring the nomadic lifestyle of the Bedouins, where the truth is their desert tales are woven not just with sand and stars, but with centuries of survival and kinship. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. In the vast, sun-scorched stretches of the Arabian Peninsula, where a person would sooner find a mirage than a Starbucks, the Bedouins carved out a life of remarkable resilience and adaptability. These intrepid desert dwellers weren't just wandering aimlessly in the sand. They were the original masters of the desert, long before GPS could save you from getting hopelessly lost in the dunes. They were the real-life Mac jivers of their time, making the most out of an environment that seemed to offer next to nothing. The Bedouin lifestyle didn't just pop up overnight like an unexpected Wi-Fi connection. It was shaped over centuries, driven by the harsh realities of their environment. Think about it. The Arabian Peninsula is mostly desert, with the Rub al-Khali, or the Empty Quarter, being the largest continuous sand desert in the world. We're talking about a place where daytime temperatures can roast you at 120 degrees F, about 49 degrees C, and where rainfall is as rare as a unicorn. So, trading a sedentary lifestyle for nomadism wasn't just a choice, it was a survival tactic. Back in the day, roughly around the 6th century AD, the Bedouins were already roaming these lands. They were no strangers to the push and pull of Mother Nature. The scarcity of water and pasture in the desert dictated their movements. These folks were like human barometers, constantly on the move in search of greener pastures, literally. They knew which oases to hit at what time of year, and they didn't need a weather app to tell them when a sandstorm was on the horizon. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the idea of a free and adventurous nomadic life might sound appealing in today's era of office cubicles, it was a gritty reality. The Bedouins had to be tough. They lived in tents made from goat hair, which was not exactly the Hilton, but it was surprisingly effective at keeping the heat at bay. Their diet was simple, relying heavily on dates, milk, and the occasional meat when a goat or sheep was sacrificed. Not exactly Michelin-star cuisine, but it kept them going. Now, let's talk camels. If the Bedouins were the CEOs of desert survival, camels were their indispensable employees. These ships of the desert weren't just about getting from A to B without a sand dune-induced meltdown. They were the backbone of Bedouin life. Camels provided milk, meat, and wool. Their dung was used as fuel because, well, trees weren't exactly lining the streets out there. A camel could carry a load of 400 pounds, about 181 kg, and travel up to 25 miles, 40 km a day, making them the perfect companions for the long haul. Economically, camels were the Bedouins' ticket to the wider world, helping them establish trade routes that bridged distant lands. Picture this, a caravan of camels laden with goods like frankincense and myrrh, plodding across the desert to trade with merchants from as far away as the Mediterranean. These trade networks were the ancient world's version of the Silk Road, minus the silk and plus a lot of sand. The Bedouins were middlemen, facilitating cultural exchanges and economic transactions between the East and the West. They were like the Amazon Prime of their day, minus the 2-day shipping. But let's not gloss over the complexities. While the image of a noble Bedouin caravan traversing the sands is enticing, the reality of trade was a tough business. Routes were perilous, and survival often depended on the whims of nature and the threat of raids from rival tribes. The Bedouins had to be shrewd negotiators and formidable warriors, defending their trade and territory with the same tenacity that they used to eke out a living in such an unforgiving environment. So, how did this nomadic lifestyle shape their society? The Bedouins valued qualities like bravery, loyalty, and hospitality. Honor was everything, an unspoken currency that held as much weight as the gold and spices they traded. Their oral poetry celebrated these virtues, making poets the rock stars of Bedouin culture. A killer poem could earn you fame and respect, not to mention a few camels. In essence, the Bedouins' embrace of a nomadic lifestyle was a masterclass in adaptation. They turned the harshness of the desert to their advantage, becoming the unsung heroes of a vibrant, interconnected ancient world. They were the ones who made the desert their home and their livelihood, proving that even the most inhospitable places on Earth could be tamed, or at least negotiated with. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in a world that seemed determined to do the opposite. And that's just the beginning. The Bedouin story is one of resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability. They remind us that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most rewarding journeys. But hold that thought, because there's much more to their tale than just camel rides and sandstorms. And speaking of stories that thrive on the edge of reality and legend, let's dive deeper into the social fabric that held Bedouin tribes together like the threads of a well-woven rug. Picture this: a society where your identity wasn't tied to your Twitter handle, but to your clan. Yes, the Bedouins were the OGs of clan culture. Long before anyone thought of forming online communities, their social structure was like a pyramid scheme of loyalty, with family ties at its core, ensuring everyone knew precisely where they stood in the pecking order. At the heart of Bedouin life was the clan, or Kabila. This wasn't your average family reunion. These were complex networks bound by blood and a shared history. Each clan was part of a larger confederation of tribes, creating a hierarchical system that rivaled any corporate ladder. Your clan was your safety net, your LinkedIn connections, and your emergency contact, all rolled into one. It dictated everything from marriage alliances to who had your back in a skirmish over a water source. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some desert utopia where everyone sang Cumbare around a campfire. The harsh realities of desert life meant that resources were scarcer than a free Wi-Fi signal. Water, pasture, and camels, the trifecta of desert survival, were often worth more than gold. In this cutthroat setting, honor was the currency that truly mattered. You couldn't buy it at a market, but you could earn it through bravery and hospitality. Now, hospitality might sound like inviting friends over for dinner, but for the Bedouins, it was a sacred duty. Guests were treated like royalty, and refusing hospitality was akin to a social media faux pas of epic proportions. T.E. Lawrence, the bloke you might know as Lawrence of Arabia, was one of those Western travelers who marveled at this practice. He noted how Bedouins would offer the best of what they had, even if it meant going hungry themselves. This wasn't just about kindness. It was a strategic move to forge alliances and build reputations. But while the romantic image of Bedouin hospitality is as appealing as an Instagram filter, the reality was, let's say, a tad grittier. Picture yourself in a tent, sipping on camel milk, surrounded by people who could recite poetry that would make Shakespeare blush. Sounds dreamy, right? Except when the poetic lines were about the time someone's great-grandfather avenged a family insult by raiding a rival tribe. Bedouin society was a delicate dance between loyalty and rivalry, where feuds could simmer for generations like a pot of never-ending stew. Let's talk about those feuds for a moment. In a world where the nearest police station was a mirage away, the Bedouins had to be their own law enforcers. If someone wronged you, it was up to your clan to seek justice, sometimes in the form of good old-fashioned revenge. And while Hollywood might paint this as a noble quest, the reality was often more about survival than glory. These conflicts could erupt over anything from stolen camels to a slight at a wedding, and they required cunning and courage to navigate. It's easy to romanticize the idea of a society built on honor and hospitality, but let's not forget the desert's harsh backdrop. Life was a constant struggle against the elements and each other, with the ever-present need for resources driving much of the social interaction. This wasn't a storybook version of the Wild West. It was a reality where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. And speaking of death, let's not overlook the role of oral poetry in Bedouin culture. These weren't just tales spun around a campfire. They were the social media posts of their day, broadcasting feats of bravery and acts of betrayal across the sands. Poets were the influencers, shaping reputations and preserving history with the power of their words. A well-crafted poem could elevate a family to legendary status, or, if you were unlucky, immortalize your blunders for all time. So, while the image of Bedouin life may evoke visions of starry nights and endless dunes, the reality was more akin to a high-stakes chess game played on shifting sands. It was a society that thrived on adaptability and resilience, where every decision was weighed against the harshness of the environment. The romanticized tales of honor and loyalty were underpinned by the gritty truth of survival in one of the world's most unforgiving landscapes. As we dig deeper into the Bedouin way of life, it's clear that their story is one of contrasts. They were both poets and warriors, hosts and raiders, navigating an existence that was as precarious as it was profound. The myths that surround them are as enduring as the desert itself, but it's the reality of their lives that truly captivates. And as we continue to explore their tale, remember that the sands of time hold many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. As we continue our trek across the sands of Bedouin history, it becomes clear that these desert wanderers didn't just survive on sheer willpower and camel milk alone. No, they were much more than just rugged individualists resisting the unyielding desert. They were the connective tissue between civilizations, the unheralded networkers who made the seemingly impossible possible, turning vast stretches of inhospitable land into bustling corridors of commerce and culture. When it came to interacting with neighboring civilizations, the Bedouins were the original masters of diplomacy, long before LinkedIn made networking a household term. Take the Byzantine Empire, for example. This colossal entity was like the tech giant of its day, sprawling and powerful. While the Byzantines were busy perfecting the art of bureaucracy, the Bedouins were out in the desert, doing what they did best, trading and making strategic alliances that would shame any modern-day corporate merger. The Bedouins served as middlemen in a trade network that extended from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. They didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas, technologies, and sometimes even a bit of gossip. Picture them as the ancient world's social media influencers, minus the selfies. They were the ones spreading the word about the latest Byzantine fashion or the newest scientific innovation coming out of Damascus. It was all about maintaining those delicate relationships with both the Byzantine overlords and the local tribes, ensuring the smooth flow of commerce and information. The Bedouins' relationship with the Byzantines was akin to a complicated love affair, full of mutual benefit, occasional friction, and of course, the inevitable political machinations. The Byzantines needed the Bedouins as much as the Bedouins needed them. When the Byzantine Empire was threatened by the Sassanid Persians, the Bedouins were often called upon to act as a buffer, a sort of human firewall, if you will, to protect the Byzantine territories. In return, they received protection and tributes, cementing their role not just as traders, but as key players in the region's geopolitical chessboard. Fast forward to the Ottoman Empire's rise, and the Bedouins were still at it, proving that adaptability was their true superpower. You see, the Ottomans, who were the new kids on the block, saw the value in keeping the Bedouins close. They understood that controlling the Arabian Peninsula with its strategic trade routes and fierce desert tribes was no small feat. So, what did they do? They utilized the Bedouins' deep-rooted knowledge of the land and their unmatched skills as guides and traders. The Bedouins, in turn, got something out of this deal too: autonomy and a steady flow of trade opportunities. Talk about a win-win scenario. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and sand dunes. The Bedouins' role as intermediaries put them in a precarious position. They had to balance alliances carefully, navigating the intricate web of tribal loyalties and imperial demands. One wrong move could mean the difference between prosperity and peril. It's like playing a high-stakes poker game where everyone else at the table is a seasoned card shark, and the ante is your livelihood. But let's not forget the rise of Islam, a seismic shift that reverberated through the Arabian Peninsula like a sandstorm on steroids. The Bedouins found themselves at the heart of this transformation, both as converts and as custodians of the new faith. This was a time when the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad spread like wildfire, altering the social and political landscape forever. Suddenly, the tribes were united under a new banner, one that promised not just spiritual salvation, but also a sense of communal identity that transcended tribal divisions. The Bedouins, with their intimate knowledge of the desert and its trade routes, were instrumental in the rapid expansion of Islam. They were the ones who carried the message across the sands, ensuring that the new faith reached the farthest corners of the known world. But it wasn't just about spreading the word. The rise of Islam also meant new opportunities for political alliances and economic growth. The Bedouins, ever the opportunists, capitalized on these changes, solidifying their role as key players in a rapidly evolving world. Yet, For all their adaptability, the Bedouins were still fiercely independent. They adhered to their own code of honor and traditions, even as they embraced the new faith. It was this ability to hold onto their identity while navigating the shifting sands of history that set them apart. They were like chameleons, able to blend into any environment without losing their essence. And in a world where survival often hinged on one's ability to adapt, the Bedouins were the ultimate survivors. In peeling back the layers of Bedouin history, we uncover a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, adaptability, and cunning. They were the silent architects of the ancient world's interconnectedness, bridging cultures while fiercely maintaining their own. Their story is one of constant evolution, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of ever-changing landscapes. As we continue this journey through Bedouin history, remember that there's more to come. We've only scratched the surface of their interactions with the great empires of the past. The sands of time hold many more secrets waiting to be uncovered, tales of intrigue and survival that defy the simplicity of romanticized myths. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the complexities of their world, where every grain of sand tells a story worth hearing. As we dig further into the Bedouin saga, let's fast forward from the golden sands of ancient trade routes to the geopolitical chessboard of the 20th century. Imagine this. The Bedouin tribes, once the masters of the open desert, now find themselves corralled by borders drawn up by people who probably couldn't tell a camel from a dromedary. The creation of modern nation-states in the Middle East was like a plot twist no one saw coming, and it left the Bedouins grappling with a new reality that was as harsh as any desert sun. Here's the rub. The early 1900s saw the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the subsequent carving up of the Middle East by European powers. We're talking about the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916, where British and French diplomats divvied up the region with all the finesse of a toddler sharing toys. This arbitrary line-drawing exercise created borders that didn't just ignore the natural and tribal landscapes, they bulldozed right through them. The Bedouins, whose lives were defined by the endless horizon, suddenly found themselves boxed in by invisible barriers that had very real consequences. For centuries, the Bedouins roamed freely, following ancient migration patterns dictated by the seasons and the availability of precious resources. But with the establishment of countries like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Iraq, these nomadic paths were interrupted by border checkpoints and passports. The very idea of a fixed national identity was as foreign to the Bedouins as air conditioning. And let's face it, these new borders were about as useful to them as sandals in a snowstorm. Enter the sedentarization policies of the mid-20th century, as governments in the region attempted to settle the Bedouins. The idea was to transform them into sedentary farmers or urban dwellers, contributing to the national economy in a way that could be measured in taxes and census data. Cue the irony. This push to settle the Bedouins was often driven by the very oil wealth that their lands contained. Governments were eager to develop these resources, and a wandering populace was seen as an obstacle to progress. So, the Bedouins were offered land, often far from their traditional territories, housing, and incentives to give up their wandering ways. Imagine trying to convince a fish that it would be happier on dry land. It was a hard sell. Economic pressures played a massive role in this transformation. With the discovery of oil in the Arabian Peninsula, the region experienced a seismic economic shift. Suddenly, the desert was no longer just a vast emptiness. It was a reservoir of black gold. For the Bedouins, this meant that their traditional way of life was increasingly incompatible with the booming oil economy. Jobs in the oil industry offered steady paychecks, luring many Bedouins away from their nomadic existence. It was as if the desert itself had been sold out from under them, replaced by pipelines and oil rigs. But let's not sugarcoat it. The transition from a nomadic to a sedentary lifestyle was about as smooth as a camel ride in a sandstorm. For many Bedouins, the move to urban areas meant grappling with a loss of cultural identity and a sense of dislocation. The skills that had sustained them for generations, navigation, animal husbandry, oral traditions, suddenly seemed as outdated as a flip phone. And while some Bedouins adapted to urban life, others found themselves marginalized in rapidly modernizing societies. Their expertise in desert survival rendered obsolete by air conditioning and automobiles. Technological changes only added to the upheaval. The introduction of cars and trucks meant that the camel, once the cornerstone of Bedouin life, was gradually replaced by motorized transport. Sure, cars could cover more ground in less time, but they lacked the soul of a trusty camel companion. And let's not even get started on GPS, which stripped the Bedouins of their legendary navigation skills, making the ancient art of reading the stars seem like a mere party trick. Yet, despite these seismic shifts, the Bedouins have shown an uncanny ability to adapt. In the face of modernity's relentless march, they found ways to maintain their cultural heritage. Traditional poetry and music still thrive, and many Bedouins continue to celebrate their roots through festivals and cultural events. The rise of ecotourism has also provided an unexpected lifeline, with curious travelers eager to experience the romance of the desert firsthand. It's as if the world finally realized that the Bedouins had been onto something all along, that there's beauty and wisdom in living in harmony with the land, even if that land has been parceled out and paved over. But let's not get carried away by the allure of these modern-day success stories. The reality is that many Bedouins continue to face significant challenges. The loss of traditional lands, combined with the pressures of adapting to urban life, has led to social and economic struggles. Unemployment rates among Bedouin communities are often higher than national averages, and access to education and healthcare remains a pressing issue. It's a reminder that, while the romance of the desert endures, the harsh realities of survival in the modern world are as unforgiving as the desert sun. In this tale of transformation, the Bedouins stand as a testament to the enduring human spirit. They remind us that while borders and economies may shift, the essence of a people cannot be so easily contained. Their story is one of resilience in the face of change, a reminder that the sands of time may shift, but the spirit of the desert remains eternal. And so, as we take a moment to reflect on the Bedouins' journey through the 20th century and beyond, remember that their story is far from over. The desert winds continue to carry whispers of their past, present, and future, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people who have weathered the storms of history and emerged, if not unscathed, then certainly undaunted. Stay with us as we continue to unravel their tale, for the sands of time hold many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. As the Bedouins continue to navigate the sands of time, it's clear that their journey is far from over. The modern Bedouin experience is a delicate balancing act, a tightrope walk between the pull of age-old traditions and the push of modernity's demands. Imagine trying to juggle a smartphone, a camel saddle, and a family heirloom tent all at once. That's the Bedouin reality today. In the 21st century, the Bedouins find themselves at a crossroads, their culture straddling the line between preservation and adaptation. The allure of the nomadic lifestyle, with its promise of freedom and simplicity, remains strong, but the practicalities of modern life have introduced new challenges. For many Bedouins, maintaining their traditional ways is akin to trying to keep a sandcastle intact during high tide. Economically, the shift from a nomadic to a more settled lifestyle has brought both opportunities and obstacles. Tourism, for instance, has emerged as a double-edged sword. On one hand, it offers a source of income and a platform to share their rich cultural heritage with the world. Bedouin-led tours of the desert, complete with camel rides and traditional meals, have become popular attractions in countries like Jordan and Oman. This burgeoning industry not only helps sustain local economies, but also provides a bridge between the past and present. On the flip side, the influx of visitors can strain resources and lead to a commodification of culture that risks reducing ancient traditions to mere spectacles. Meanwhile, the push for education and modernization has opened doors for younger generations. Schools and universities provide Bedouin youth with opportunities that their ancestors could scarcely have imagined. But with these new paths come choices that aren't always easy. Do they pursue careers in urban centers, embracing technology and global connectivity? Or do they stay rooted in their communities, preserving the ways of life that have defined their people for centuries? It's a question that doesn't have a simple answer, and the stakes are as high as the desert sun. Socially, the Bedouins are grappling with the pressures of integrating into modern nation-states while maintaining their distinct identity. The tension between individual national identities and collective tribal affiliations can be as tricky as navigating a sandstorm. Government policies often aim to assimilate Bedouin communities into the broader national fabric, but this can sometimes feel like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. The challenge lies in finding a way to honor their roots while also participating fully in the national narrative. Politically, the Bedouins continue to play a role, albeit a more subdued one, in the larger regional dynamics. Their intimate knowledge of the land and its resources remains a valuable asset, particularly in areas where control over water and land is contentious. In some places, Bedouin tribes have been able to leverage their position to negotiate better terms for land use and resource management, proving that even in the face of immense change, adaptability is their greatest strength. Yet, as we peel back the layers of Bedouin life today, it's important not to get lost in the romance of it all. The realities of modern Bedouin existence can be as harsh as the desert itself. Unemployment and poverty rates in some Bedouin communities are stubbornly high, and access to basic services like healthcare and education can be limited. These challenges are compounded by the ongoing environmental pressures that threaten their traditional way of life. Climate change, with its unpredictable weather patterns and rising temperatures, poses a direct threat to the fragile ecosystems that Bedouin communities rely on. Despite these hurdles, the resilience of the Bedouin spirit shines through. Community leaders and activists are working tirelessly to preserve their heritage, advocating for their rights, and ensuring that their voices are heard in national and international arenas. Cultural preservation initiatives, from storytelling workshops to traditional craft revival projects, aim to keep their rich history alive for future generations. It's a testament to the enduring power of a people who have weathered the storms of history with grace and tenacity. So, what is it about the nomadic lifestyle that continues to capture our imagination? Perhaps it's the tantalizing promise of freedom from the constraints of modern society, the idea of living life on one's own terms amidst the vast, open desert. In a world where we're increasingly tethered to technology and routine, the Bedouins' way of life offers a glimpse into an existence less burdened by the trappings of consumerism. It's a reminder that there are other ways to define what it means to feel at home. But let's not romanticize this too much. The nomadic lifestyle is not some utopian ideal. It's a demanding existence that requires resilience, resourcefulness, and a deep connection to the land. It's about understanding that home is not just a physical place, but a state of being, a concept that transcends borders and defies easy categorization. As we conclude this journey through the sands of Bedouin history, one thing is clear. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of adaptability and resilience. The Bedouins have shown us that it's possible to honor the past while embracing the future, to find strength in tradition while navigating the challenges of modernity. In a rapidly changing world, their journey serves as a poignant reminder that the essence of a people cannot be easily contained or defined. The Bedouins will continue to adapt, evolve, and thrive, proving that even in the harshest environments, life finds a way to endure. So, the next time you find yourself yearning for the romance of the desert, remember that behind the myths and legends lies a remarkable story of human survival and ingenuity. The Bedouins have taught us that home is not just a destination, but a journey, one that is as timeless as the desert sands themselves. In the bustling heart of 19th century Bengal, where rickshaws jostled for space, and the air was thick with the scent of spices and revolution, a young boy named Rabindranath Tagore was busy rewriting the script of his own life. Born in 1861 into the illustrious Tagore family, which had more wealth than most of us can fathom, Rabindranath was expected to follow a path paved with propriety and predictability. But surprise, surprise, he had other plans. You see, Tagore's early life was a delightful cocktail of rebellion and creativity. While most kids his age were diligently copying lines in school, young Rabbi was busy perfecting the art of playing hooky. It's said that his idea of a good time was skipping school to pen poetry and daydream under the Calcutta sun. The classroom walls felt like a prison to him, and he often found himself plotting elaborate escape routes. His family, a bastion of cultural renaissance, wanted him to soak up the best education money could buy. But Rabbi, ever the iconoclast, decided he would rather soak up inspiration from the world around him. Now, let's talk about the unique schooling system he was subjected to, or rather, subjected himself to. His formal education was as patchy as a quilt, with stints in various schools, none of which seemed to hold his attention for long. Legend of the amusing kind has it that he once sent a letter to his father, Rabindranath Tagore, essentially saying, "Hey, education is great and all, but can I just learn at home?" And wouldn't you know it, Rabindranath, a forward-thinking man with a penchant for philosophical musings, agreed. Thus began a journey of homeschooling that was more like a free-for-all intellectual buffet than a structured syllabus. In the Tagore household, education was less about rote memorization and more about holistic development. Rabbi was encouraged to explore literature, music, and the arts, which was, let's face it, a pretty sweet gig for a kid with a penchant for the pen. His brothers and sisters were equally talented, creating a vibrant atmosphere of debate and creativity. It was like living in a perpetual TED talk, minus the PowerPoint slides, of course. But don't get too cozy with this idyllic image just yet. Let's not forget the societal pressures looming over young Rabbi. The Tagores were part of Kolkata's elite, and with great wealth came even greater expectations. Picture this: a young boy expected to step into the shoes of a future leader, a man of stature and significance, potentially sipping tea with British dignitaries while discussing the weather. Instead, Rabbi was often found scribbling verses about the beauty of the Ganges or composing tunes on his harmonium. Society loved a good rule follower, and yet here was Rabbi, colourfully colouring outside the lines. But this was a time when Bengal was ripe with change. The era was marked by the Bengal Renaissance, a cultural revival that started in the late 19th century and was characterized by a surge in literature, music, and art. It was a time when the old clashed with the new, when tradition wrestled with modernity. And in the midst of it all was our man Rabbi, who seemed to embody this very conflict. Now, let's dive into some of the more humorous tales from his childhood. One story goes that he once wrote a poem titled Kabuliwala, inspired by a street vendor he saw from his window. The poem was an instant hit in the Tagore household, but Rabindranath was less interested in the applause and more intrigued by the vendor's exotic tales. This curiosity about people and their stories would later become a hallmark of his literary work. But at this stage, it was just another reason to dodge arithmetic lessons. It wasn't just in poetry that young Rabbi showed his flair. He was also known for his rather imaginative excuses to avoid traditional schooling. There's a delightful account of him convincing a tutor that he had to miss a lesson to save an ailing sparrow. True or not, it's the kind of anecdote that paints a vivid picture of a child whose heart was as big as his imagination. So, while his peers were busy learning the Queen's English and how to present themselves as proper gentlemen, Rabbi was busy crafting worlds of his own. And let's be honest, which sounds like more fun, his early literary experiments were met with mixed reactions. Some family members found them charming, while others worried about his future. But in a society where conformity was the name of the game, Rabbi was already a master at playing by his own rules. By the time he was in his teens, Rabindranath had written several pieces of prose and poetry, much to the chagrin of those who thought he should be focusing on more practical subjects. But then again, this was a family that fostered creativity, encouraged critical thinking, and championed cultural expression. They were the kind of people who would likely have Instagrammed their dinner if the technology had existed. It's crucial to understand that Tagore's unconventional education was not just a case of a wealthy kid slacking off. It was a reflection of the cultural and intellectual currents swirling through Bengal at the time. The Indian subcontinent was a hotbed of change, with the British Raj imposing its will, while Indian intellectuals like the Tagores sought to carve out a space for their own cultural identity. In this charged atmosphere, Rabindranath's early experiments with literature were acts of both personal and political defiance. As we wrap up this first act in the life of Rabindranath Tagore, it's clear that he was not your average 19th century Bengali boy. He was a dreamer, a thinker, and a rebel, all rolled into one. His early years were not defined by classrooms or textbooks, but by the vibrant tapestry of life around him. a tapestry he would eventually weave into the stunning literary works that the world would come to cherish. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say that young Rabbi was well on his way to becoming a cultural icon, even if he didn't quite know it yet. And just like that, the curtain lifts on the next act of Rabindranath Tagore's life, where the young dreamer morphs into a literary force of nature. Picture a teenager teetering on the brink of adulthood, armed with a pen sharper than most swords. It's the late 1870, and while the rest of the world is busy inventing the light bulb and losing hats over the telephone, young Rabbi is busy reinventing literature in colonial India. He's kicking off his literary awakening with a bang, or more accurately, with a carefully crafted stanza. In 1877, the ink-stained youth published his first substantial piece, a poem called Abhilash, which translates to desire. The poem was a hit, but let's not romanticize it too much. It wasn't all roses and applause. His early work was often met with skepticism from the literary old guard. Picture a room full of tweed-jacketed critics, their monocles dropping in shock, as this young upstart dared to defy traditional forms. But that was Rabbi for you, always happy to ruffle feathers. It wasn't just poetry that called to him. He ventured into the world of short stories, a genre that was still feeling its way around in the literary playground. His collection, Galpagachcha, a bouquet of stories, if you will, was an instant classic. It was like he'd bottled the essence of everyday Bengali life and poured it onto the page. The stories were simple yet profound, a testament to his knack for turning the mundane into the magical. Critics may have sniffed, but the public, they were hooked. Now let's talk plays. The theatre, a world where drama and reality tango in a fine dance. Rabbi's foray into playwriting was like stepping into a wild, uncharted jungle. His early play, Valmiki Pratibha, was a bold reimagining of the life of Valmiki, the sage who penned the epic Ramayana. In this work, Rabbi took creative liberties that would make today's screenwriters blush. The play was met with mixed reviews, much like a modern indie film at Sundance. Some hailed it as revolutionary, others were ready to dust off the rotten tomatoes. But why did he write the way he did? Enter the Bengal Renaissance, a cultural tsunami that swept through Bengal, turning the old ways on their head. It was a time when artists, thinkers, and reformers were as common as tea stalls in Calcutta. Society was abuzz with ideas, and Rabbi was right in the thick of it. The Indian independence movement was also simmering, like a pot ready to boil over. These were the fires that tempered his work, and he wrote with a conviction that was as much about cultural identity as it was about personal expression. Tagore's early writing process was a blend of inspiration and perspiration. He was known for his rather eccentric methods, often writing late into the night. Legend has it that he once wrote an entire story on the back of an envelope because he couldn't find paper. His creative process was, let's say, less about order and more about chaos. Imagine a room filled with crumpled papers, half-empty teacups, and a mind racing with ideas faster than a telegram. But let's not kid ourselves. Being an avant-garde artist wasn't all bohemian rhapsody. It came with its own set of struggles. Tagore's work often clashed with the colonial mindset. The British Raj had little patience for art that wasn't about them or their ideals. And here was Rabbi spinning tales deeply rooted in Indian culture and philosophy. You could say he was the original, write local, think global kind of guy. The critical reception to his work was as varied as the monsoon rains, sometimes a gentle drizzle, other times a torrential downpour of criticism. Yet he persisted. It was like an artist painting with words, his canvas the collective consciousness of a nation yearning for self-expression. His writings were a reflection of the economic and social conditions of the time, an India straining under colonial rule, yet rich in its cultural tapestry. Tagore's work was in many ways a mirror to the society he lived in. He wrote of love and loss, of hope and despair, capturing the human condition with an authenticity that still resonates today. He was a storyteller at heart, and his tales were his way of fighting back against the forces that sought to stifle his voice. It was a struggle, yes, but one he embraced with open arms. As we close this chapter, let's not forget that Rabindranath Tagore was more than just a writer. He was a cultural phenomenon. His early works laid the foundation for a literary legacy that would go on to inspire generations. He was a man ahead of his time, a beacon of creativity in an era of conformity. But remember, we're just getting started. The best is yet to come, and Rabbi's story is far from over. Stay tuned for more twists and turns in the tale of this literary maestro. As we move into the next chapter of this literary adventure, brace yourself for a tale that stretches from the bustling streets of Calcutta to the snowy landscapes of Stockholm. Imagine this. The year is 1913, and Rabindranath Tagore, a man who once penned poems on the back of envelopes, is about to become a household name across the globe. Yes, the same rabbi who entertained his tutors with tales of rescuing sparrows is about to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature, marking a seismic shift in his life and career. Now, let's sink our teeth into the meat of this story. Tagore was awarded the Nobel for his collection Gitanjali, or Song Offerings, a sublime compilation of poems that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. The book was like a lyrical bridge, connecting the spiritual musings of the East with the literary traditions of the West. And let's be honest, it was as if the universe decided to throw a literary curveball into the Eurocentric world of early 20th century literature. The Nobel Committee, which had predominantly recognized Western authors, was suddenly smitten by the mystique of this Indian poet. But hold your horses before you start picturing this as an overnight success story. Tagore had been writing for decades, crafting poetry, plays, and essays that were as diverse as the spices in an Indian bazaar. By 1913, he had already published more than 24 volumes. Yet, outside the Indian subcontinent, his works were about as well known as a snowflake in the Sahara. It was only after the English translation of Gitanjali, thanks to a little help from his friend W.B. Yeats, who wrote a gushing introduction, that the Western world took notice. And take notice they did, with a reaction that was part admiration, part mystification. Tagore's Nobel win was a game changer. Suddenly, he was catapulted into the limelight, a literary superstar in a world still grappling with the rigid hierarchies of colonial rule. Picture the absurdity. An Indian poet, writing about spiritual enlightenment and humanism, now being lauded by the very society that had colonized his homeland. It was like a scene from a satirical novel, where the colonized becomes the celebrated, albeit within the confines of a global stage still dominated by European ideals. So, what did this newfound fame bring? For starters, Tagore became the toast of literary circles across the globe. He rubbed shoulders with the likes of Albert Einstein and George Bernard Shaw, exchanging ideas that would make today's TED talks seem like casual coffee chats. His interactions with other literary giants were nothing short of legendary. Imagine the intellectual fireworks when Tagore met with Ezra Pound, the American expatriate poet known for his complex and sometimes controversial ideas. Their conversations must have been like verbal chess matches, each move calculated and profound. Now, let's debunk the myth of Tagore as a one-hit wonder. His Nobel Prize wasn't a fluke, but the result of years, nay, decades, of relentless toil. This was a man who wrote with the tenacity of an insomniac owl, often into the wee hours of the night. Before Gitanjali, Tagore had already garnered significant acclaim in India. It was just that the rest of the world was a little late to the party. Think of him not as a shooting star that suddenly lit up the sky, but as a slow-burning comet, steadily gathering light and momentum over time. The Western reaction to his win was a cocktail of awe and exoticism. There was a tendency to romanticize Tagore as a mystic from the East, a sage-like figure who had descended from some spiritual cloud to enlighten the Western world. This portrayal, while appealing, was a tad reductive. Tagore was a man of many layers, an educator, a philosopher, a reformer, and his writings were as much political as they were poetic. But the allure of the mystical East was too tempting for many to resist. The irony was palpable. Here was a man whose works often critiqued colonialism, being celebrated by the very societies that perpetuated it. Tagore's global fame brought with it a whirlwind of travel. He embarked on extensive tours across Europe, the Americas, and Asia, delivering lectures and sharing his vision of a world united by culture and empathy. Picture a modern-day rock star, complete with sold-out venues and adoring crowds. But instead of guitar riffs, Tagore offered verses steeped in wisdom and humanity. His lecture circuits were events in themselves, drawing intellectuals and laypeople alike. all eager to witness the poetic genius in action. Yet, fame is a double-edged sword. While Tagore relished the opportunity to share his ideas, he was also acutely aware of the commercial and cultural commodification of his persona. The Western fascination with his Oriental wisdom sometimes overshadowed the depth and diversity of his work. It was as if the world wanted a guru, and they conveniently slotted Tagore into that role, warts and all. The reality was far more complex. Tagore was a man who defied easy categorization, a luminary in an era of shadows. Economically speaking, the Nobel Prize came with a cash reward of 150,782 Swedish krona, a tidy sum that allowed Tagore to further his educational ventures. He used the prize money to fund Visvabharati University, an institution that embodied his ideals of holistic, cross-cultural education. Located in Santanagtan, West Bengal, was envisioned as a place where the world's cultures could meet and mingle, a precursor to today's global universities. It was no small feat, and the university stands to this day as a testament to Tagore's vision. The Nobel win also underscored a glaring reality. Tagore's fame was happening in a world still very much under the thumb of colonial rule. The British Raj controlled India with an iron fist, and while Tagore's international acclaim was a matter of national pride, it did little to change the harsh realities of colonial exploitation and oppression. The absurdity was not lost on him. Here was a nation fated for its cultural achievements, even as it was economically and politically subjugated. It was a paradox that Tagore navigated with grace, using his platform to advocate for social and political reform. Despite the accolades and adoration, Tagore remained grounded, like an oak tree in a storm. He was acutely aware of the transient nature of fame and the need to remain true to his roots. His writings continued to reflect the struggles and aspirations of the common people, and he never lost sight of the broader picture, a world where art, culture, and humanity transcended borders and boundaries. As we draw this section to a close, remember that Rabindranath Tagore was more than just a Nobel laureate. He was a cultural bridge builder, a pioneer who dared to dream of a world united by shared values and mutual respect. His journey from the banks of the Ganges to the corridors of world literature was anything but ordinary. It was a journey marked by perseverance, passion, and profound insight. And while the curtain closes on this chapter, rest assured, there's more to come in the saga of this extraordinary man. So stay tuned, because the story of Rabindranath Tagore is far from over. And so, the epic tale of Rabindranath Tagore continues, swirling like a kaleidoscope of creativity and contradiction. As we delve into the later years of his life, let's set the stage for an era where Tagore, the Renaissance man, decided that writing and winning international accolades simply weren't enough. No, he had to dabble in music, art, and education, because why not? When you're already a Nobel laureate, why not start an artistic revolution? First up, music. Tagore was no one-trick pony when it came to the arts. He composed over 2,000 songs, known collectively as Rabindra Sangeet, which remain popular in Bengal to this day. Think of him as a 19th century Bob Dylan, but with more sitar and less harmonica. His songs tapped into the collective consciousness, blending classical Indian music with his own poetic style. The man was a walking Spotify playlist before Spotify was even a twinkle in the tech world's eye. But here's the kicker. Tagore didn't just stop at composing music. He actually delved into painting in his later years, and surprise, surprise, he was pretty darn good at it. His art was bold, with vibrant colors and abstract forms that would make a modern art critic swoon. Imagine an 80-year-old man picking up a brush and painting with the exuberance of a rebellious teenager. His first exhibition was in Paris in 1930, and it was a hit, proving that age didn't dim his creative spark. Now, onto education, Tagore's crowning achievement outside of literature. In 1921, he founded Visvabharati University in Santanagtan, a place where traditional boundaries of learning were meant to dissolve like sugar in chai. Tagore envisioned an institution where the world's cultures could meet, mingle, and hopefully get along better than most family reunions. It was about holistic education, learning that went beyond textbooks to embrace the arts, nature, and human values. Forget Ivy Leagues. This was the university where your soul got a degree in humanity. But let's get real for a second. Running a university was no walk in the park. Maintaining Visvabharati was a financial juggling act worthy of Cirque du Soleil. Tagore often found himself in the unenviable position of being the world's most poetic fundraiser. He once quipped that he was a beggar for education, travelling the globe, hat in hand, to secure funds. Picture him as a suave salesman, but instead of pushing vacuum cleaners, he's selling the dream of enlightened education. And despite the financial roller coaster, he managed to keep the institution afloat, proving that sometimes dreams do pay the bills. Tagore's vision for education was as much about challenging the status quo as it was about imparting knowledge. He believed in learning through nature, art, and personal interaction, an approach that was about as popular with traditionalists as a fox in a henhouse. Yet, his school attracted students from around the world. It was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, a place where a Japanese artist could discuss Zen with an Indian poet, while a European philosopher pondered over a cup of Darjeeling tea. Now, let's stir the pot a bit with Tagore's political views. He was a man of deep convictions, and his political opinions often clashed with those of his contemporaries. Tagore was a staunch critic of nationalism, famously clashing with Mahatma Gandhi on the subject. While Gandhi saw nationalism as a means to an end, Indian independence, Tagore saw it as a potential pitfall, a divisive force that could overshadow the broader quest for human unity. It was as if the two were playing chess with the future of India, each move a calculated statement of ideology. But this doesn't mean Tagore was apolitical. Far from it. He was an outspoken critic of British colonial policies, especially the oppressive laws and economic exploitation. Yet he also cautioned against replacing one form of blind allegiance with another. He returned his knighthood in protest of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in 1919, a brutal event where British troops killed hundreds of unarmed Indian civilians. It was a bold move, akin to a modern-day celebrity denouncing their award on live television, but with far higher stakes. His political stances often put him at odds with the more radical elements of the Indian independence movement. While others were calling for immediate and sometimes violent action, Tagore was advocating for a more nuanced, culturally rooted approach. He was like the voice of reason at a very loud party, trying to get everyone to sit down and talk instead of flipping tables. His vision was one of a world united by shared values and mutual respect, a dream that seemed as elusive as the proverbial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Through his later years, Tagore continued to write, compose, and inspire. His works became increasingly introspective, reflecting his musings on life, death, and everything in between. He remained a prolific writer until the very end, penning his final poem just days before his death in 1941. It was as if he was writing his own eulogy, capturing the essence of a life lived with passion and purpose. As we pause in this whirlwind tour of Tagore's later life, let's remember that he was a man who defied categorization. Was he a poet, a musician, an educator, or a philosopher? The answer is yes, all of the above and more. He was a symphony of human potential, a reminder that art, education, and politics are not separate spheres, but interconnected threads in the tapestry of life. And while this chapter closes, the story of Rabindranath Tagore is far from over. There's more to explore, so stay tuned for the next act in this epic saga. In the grand tapestry of history, Rabindranath Tagore stands as a vibrant thread, an icon whose legacy refuses to fade, even as the world dashes forward at breakneck speed. But what makes Tagore's legacy endure? Is it the sheer volume of his work, the shimmering allure of his Nobel Prize, or perhaps something more profound? Let's peel back the layers and see what lies beneath the mystique. First, let's tackle the myths. Tagore is often romanticized as the quintessential poet sage, a kind of Eastern Merlin spinning wisdom from his enchanted quill. While this image is alluring, it's about as one-dimensional as a pancake. In reality, Tagore was a man of contradictions, a champion of Indian culture who also critiqued its flaws, a proponent of spirituality who dabbled in political activism. His life was a dance of dualities, each step a testament to his belief in the power of thought and expression to bridge divides. And bridge divides he did. Tagore's influence stretched far beyond the Indian subcontinent. His works were translated into dozens of languages, reaching readers from Tokyo to Toronto. His play, The Post Office, was staged in more than a dozen countries by 1923, a global hit before the term viral was even a thing. Yet, even as his words soared across continents, they remained firmly rooted in the soil of India, capturing the essence of a nation in flux. Now, onto the economic realities. Tagore's legacy isn't just about poetry and prose. It's also a testament to his knack for turning art into impact. He used the financial windfall from his Nobel Prize to sustain Visvabharati University, a place where learning was as much about the heart as the head. Picture it as the Hogwarts of holistic education, minus the wands, but definitely with its share of magic. The institution still thrives today, a living, breathing monument to Tagore's vision. But let's not gloss over the complexities. Modern interpretations of Tagore often skim the surface, missing the nuanced layers that make his work so rich. Yes, he wrote about love and nature, but he also delved into the gritty realities of poverty, social inequality, and colonial oppression. In Gerber, The Home and the World, he dissected the conflicts between tradition and modernity, nationalism and personal freedom. It's a narrative as relevant today as it was in 1916, resonating with anyone caught between the pull of the past and the promise of the future. Tagore's ideas on education, too, remain strikingly relevant. In a world increasingly obsessed with STEM and standardized tests, his call for a more holistic, human-centered approach to learning is like a refreshing breeze in a stuffy room. He envisioned education as a journey, not a destination, a process of self-discovery rather than a race to the finish line. It's an idea that resonates with modern educators who champion creativity over conformity, innovation over rote memorization. Now, let's take a light-hearted leap and ponder how Tagore might view today's world. Picture him strolling through a modern city, perhaps with a bemused smile as he observes the digital age in full swing. Would he tweet his poetry or opt for the old-school charm of hand-pressed publishing? One could imagine him chuckling at our obsession with technology, perhaps penning a witty verse about the irony of smartphones making us less connected, not more. And social media. Tagore might see it as both a stage and a trap, a platform for expression that too often devolves into an echo chamber of memes and misinformation. And let's face it, in an age where influencers are crowned kings and queens of culture, Tagore might find the whole spectacle a bit absurd. After all, here's a man who believed in the transformative power of art and ideas, not just the transient thrill of likes and follows. Yet, he'd likely appreciate the democratization of creativity, the fact that anyone with a smartphone can now be a poet, a philosopher, or a pundit. Freedom of expression, after all, was a cause close to his heart. It's this blend of timeless wisdom and forward-thinking vision that cements Tagore's place in the pantheon of greats. He was a man who saw the world not in black and white, but in a spectrum of colors, each hue a reminder of humanity's potential for both greatness and folly. His legacy endures because it speaks to the core of what it means to be human, to dream, to question, to create. As we draw the curtain on this exploration of Tagore's life and legacy, let's remember that he was more than the sum of his achievements. He was a beacon of hope in a world often shrouded in darkness, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, art and ideas can light the way. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the complexities of life, perhaps you'll hear the echo of Tagore's voice, whispering through the pages of history, urging us to look beyond the horizon and strive for a world where culture and compassion walk hand in hand. In the grand scheme of things, Rabindranath Tagore was a man who dared to dream, and in doing so, invited the rest of us to dream along with him. His story is one of courage, creativity, and an unyielding belief in the power of the human spirit. And while his life may have ended in 1941, his legacy lives on, a testament to the idea that art and humanity are not just interconnected but inseparable. So, here's to Tagore, a poet with a pen, a philosopher with a vision, and a legacy that continues to inspire. Zheng Guanying's story kicks off in Guangdong, a region that in the late Qing dynasty had all the charm of a bustling port city mixed with the chaos of a global trade hub. Born in 1842, Zheng entered a world where tea leaves, silk, and porcelain were the currency of the day, and opium, thanks to the British and their penchant for addictive substances, was the dubious icing on the cake. Now, When you think of a Chinese household in the 19th century, you might envision serene gardens and Confucian wisdom whispered over tea. But hold on to that teapot. Zheng's family life was more like an episode of Keeping Up with the Guanyings, with ambition and tradition often butting heads like stubborn goats. Zheng's father, Zheng Wenrui, was a businessman with a nose for opportunity as sharp as a bamboo shoot. The family ran a successful import-export business, which was no small feat in an era when the Opium Wars were turning trade routes into the Wild West, if the Wild West had opium-addled bureaucrats. As a kid, Zheng Guanying was surrounded by the cacophony of dark workers, traders, and a constant stream of languages that made the Tower of Babel seem like a quiet book club. This early exposure to international commerce undoubtedly planted the seeds for his later economic theories, but more on that in a bit. Life in Guangdong during the late Qing dynasty wasn't just about trade, though. It was a time for young men to prove their mettle through the imperial examinations, a kind of academic gladiator arena where memorizing Confucian texts could make or break your future. No pressure, right? Zheng, however, had little interest in this traditional route. He was the kind of kid who'd rather doodle economic models in the margins of his books than recite classics. You can almost picture him at the dinner table, rolling his eyes as his father extolled the virtues of Confucian wisdom while Zheng plotted how to revolutionize Chinese industry. But Zheng's rebellious streak didn't mean he was all work and no play. Family anecdotes suggest he had a mischievous side. There's a story about young Zheng attempting to sell his sister's dolls to passing merchants, claiming they were rare artifacts from a distant dynasty. His father, upon discovering the scheme, reportedly laughed so hard that he nearly fell into the fish pond. This blend of entrepreneurial spirit and humor was a harbinger of Zheng's later works, where he approached China's economic issues with both pragmatism and wit. Speaking of wit, let's not forget the societal expectations of the time. In 19th century China, young men were groomed to be either scholars or bureaucrats, with family honor hanging over them like a particularly persistent rain cloud. Zheng, however, was more interested in the storm than the drizzle, always looking beyond his immediate circumstances to the wider world. While his peers were busy perfecting calligraphy, Zheng was more likely to be found at the docks, soaking up stories from foreign sailors and pondering the mechanics of steamships. This curiosity was his secret weapon, setting him apart in a society that often prized rote learning over innovation. The backdrop to all this was the aftermath of the First Opium War, 1839-1842, which had left China reeling from its defeat by the British. Treaties like the infamous Treaty of Nanking in 1842, coincidentally the year of Zheng's birth, saw China cede Hong Kong to Britain and open up its ports to foreign trade, turning economic sovereignty into a distant dream. This was the world Zheng Guanying was born into, a China caught in the throes of modernization, whether it liked it or not, and a family striving to balance traditional values with the realities of a global economy. Zheng's upbringing in Guangdong was a microcosm of the larger tensions in Chinese society. His father's business acumen and his own innate curiosity about the world were like two sides of a coin, constantly flipping in the air. One side represented the old ways, the other, new possibilities. This duality shaped Zheng's worldview, setting him on a path that would eventually lead to his visionary ideas on economic reform and modernization. In the grand tapestry of history, Zheng Guanying's early life was a single, vibrant thread woven through a larger pattern of societal change. His story is a reminder that great thinkers often start as curious children, shaped as much by their family dynamics as by the world events swirling around them. So the next time you hear someone talk about the inevitable march of history, remember the young boy at the docks in Guangdong, dreaming of a different future while his family navigated the choppy seas of the Qing dynasty's twilight years. Now, fast forward to the bustling streets of Shanghai, where young Zheng Guanying found himself in the eye of the modernization storm. If Guangdong was the warm-up act, Shanghai was the main event, a cacophonous symphony of jingling coins and clashing cultures. By the 1860, Shanghai had transformed from a sleepy fishing village into a glittering jewel of commerce, thanks to treaties like the Treaty of Nanking, which had flung open its doors to foreign influence and trade. And when I say foreign influence. Imagine a cultural mashup that would make a modern-day fusion restaurant seem as vanilla as plain rice. Zheng, now in his 20s, was navigating this mercantile jungle with the agility of a tightrope walker on a windy day. The city was a magnet for Western traders, each with their own agenda and a business card the size of a tea tray. These traders weren't exactly the suave, monocle-wearing gentlemen of Downton Abbey fame. Picture more of a ragtag crew of opportunists, each one eyeing the next big deal like a hawk circling its prey. Zheng's encounters with these Westerners were a blend of fascination and frustration, a tango of cultural exchange that was as awkward as it was enlightening. Shanghai, this time, was a patchwork quilt of international concessions, a term that sounds much fancier than the reality. The British, Americans, French, and others carved out their own little slices of the city, each with its own laws and customs. It was like a geopolitical tea party where the hosts forgot to invite the actual residents of the city. For Zheng, this presented both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, he had access to cutting-edge ideas and technologies. On the other, he was navigating a labyrinth of red tape that made the Great Wall seem like a minor inconvenience. As a young entrepreneur, Zheng tried to find his footing in this economic circus. He worked for several foreign firms, absorbing their practices like a sponge, an experience that would later inform his views on economic reform. But let's not get too starry-eyed about this East-West exchange. Romanticized tales of cultural fusion often gloss over the gritty details. Business deals that were more like poker games with loaded decks, and partnerships that could dissolve faster than sugar in hot tea. Take, for instance, the silk trade. A commodity beloved by both East and West, it was Shanghai's golden ticket. Zheng found himself in the thick of this industry, which was as cutthroat as it was lucrative. The Western traders had a knack for bargaining that would make a flea market vendor blush, and Zheng quickly learned that the price of doing business often included a healthy dose of skepticism and a backup plan stashed in his pocket. Despite the challenges, Zheng's time in Shanghai was transformative. It was here that he began to formulate his ideas on economic modernization. He saw firsthand how Western technology and business practices could boost productivity, but he also witnessed the darker side of progress: exploitation, inequality, and a cultural divide as wide as the Yangtze River. The city was a microcosm of the larger forces at play in China, a nation grappling with its identity in the face of relentless change. In this whirlwind of commerce, Zheng developed a keen sense for the absurdities of the business world. He observed how Western traders would disguise their financial motives with platitudes about cultural exchange, all the while eyeing the profit margins like a cat eyeing a plump mouse. This duality was not lost on Zheng, who had a knack for cutting through the pretensions with a well-placed quip or a sardonic smile. Yet, despite the chaos, Shanghai was also a place of unprecedented opportunity. It was a city where ideas flowed as freely as the Yangtze, where the clash of cultures could spark innovation as easily as conflict. For Zheng, this was a revelation. He started to envision a China that could harness the best of both worlds, a nation that could modernize without losing its soul to the whims of foreign powers. But let's not kid ourselves about the price of this progress. The path to modernization was littered with pitfalls, and the stakes were as high as the tallest pagoda. Many Chinese workers found themselves caught in the machinery of progress, their lives upended by the relentless march of industrialization. For Zheng, this was a sobering reminder that economic growth could come at a steep cost, a lesson that would later underpin his writings on reform. As Zheng navigated the mercantile world of Shanghai, he was also absorbing the political realities of the time. The Qing dynasty was struggling to maintain control in the face of internal rebellions and external pressures, and the imperial court was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Zheng's experiences in Shanghai would later inform his critiques of the Qing government, which he saw as out of touch and ill-equipped to handle the challenges of the modern world. In the end, Zheng's years in Shanghai were a crucible of transformation, shaping his views on economic reform and modernization. It was a city where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye, where the price of progress was written in the sweat and tears of those who toiled in its factories and docks. Yet, amidst the chaos, Zheng saw the potential for a new China, a nation that could rise from the ashes of its past and forge a future that honored its traditions while embracing the possibilities of the modern age. And as the sun set over the bustling port, Zheng Guanying stood at the crossroads of history, ready to take the next step on his journey toward becoming one of China's most visionary thinkers. Zheng Guanying was like a mariner charting unknown waters, armed not with a compass, but with a quill and an unyielding belief in the power of reform. His time in Shanghai had been a whirlwind of ideas and contradictions, and now it was time to put pen to paper and articulate his vision for a modern China. He wasn't trying to pen the next great Chinese novel, think less journey to the West and more journey to the future. Zheng's seminal work, Words of Warning to a Prosperous Age, was a manifesto, a roadmap, and at times a wish list that made Santa's look modest. Zheng was convinced that China needed to shake off its Confucian cobwebs and embrace the innovations of the West, albeit without throwing tradition under the rickshaw. His proposals weren't just about swapping out silk robes for suits and ties. No, they were about economic modernization, infrastructure projects, and trade reforms that could propel China into the modern age faster than a steam engine on a downhill track. He envisioned railroads crisscrossing the vast Chinese landscape like arteries, pumping economic vitality from the bustling coasts to the sleepy hinterlands. In his mind, every province would have its own industrial heart, beating with the rhythm of progress and prosperity. But let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. Zheng's ideas, while visionary, were often tinged with an optimism that bordered on naivete. He imagined a China where steamships plied the rivers with the punctuality of a Swiss watch, and factories hummed with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. The reality, of course, was that China was more like a sleepy giant, reluctant to rise from its centuries-old slumber. The Qing bureaucracy was a lumbering beast, resistant to change and as innovative as a brick wall. Take, for instance, Zheng's ideas on trade reform. He envisioned a system where tariffs were streamlined and foreign investment was encouraged, a bit like inviting the wolves into the sheepfold, but with a treaty in hand. The Qing officials, however, were more interested in maintaining their grip on power than in opening China to the world. They viewed foreign trade with the enthusiasm of a cat faced with a bath, fearing it might wash away their authority. Zheng's proposals for infrastructure were equally ambitious. He dreamed of railways connecting every major city, reducing travel times from weeks to mere days. The irony, of course, was that the Qing government couldn't lay track to save its life, quite literally. When it came to infrastructure, the Qing dynasty was about as effective as building a sandcastle in a monsoon. Zheng's dream of a rail network was a plan for the future, but in the bureaucratic maze of the Qing court, it was a future that remained stubbornly out of reach. Yet, in the face of such inertia, Zheng's writings struck a chord. His ideas were like sparks in the dry tinder of a tired empire, and his voice was one of the few calling for reform from within. Words of Warning to a Prosperous Age wasn't just a book, it was a clarion call, a challenge to the status quo. Zheng argued that China had the resources, the manpower, and the ingenuity to become a world leader. All it needed was the will to act. His proposals weren't just pie-in-the-sky dreams. They were rooted in practical observations and real-world experiences. Having seen the bustling ports of Shanghai and the factories of the West, Zheng understood the economic forces at play. He knew that modernization wasn't just about adopting new technology, but about fostering a mindset that embraced innovation and competition. But in the halls of the Forbidden City, where decisions were made at a pace that would make a snail look hasty, Zheng's ideas were little more than whispers in the wind. The Qing court, steeped in tradition and suspicion, was wary of change. The emperor and his advisors were like a ship's crew, more concerned with patching leaks than setting a new course, and Zheng's visionary ideas were often met with polite nods and swift inaction. It's easy to romanticize Zheng's vision as a panacea for all of China's ills, but the truth was more complex. Even if the Qing dynasty had embraced his ideas wholesale, the path to modernization would have been fraught with challenges. Industrialization is a double-edged sword, and while it brings prosperity, it also demands sacrifices. The factories Zheng envisioned would not only produce goods, but also social upheaval, as workers traded rural hardship for urban squalor. Zheng wasn't blind to these realities. His writings often reflected a deep awareness of the potential pitfalls of modernization. He cautioned against blind imitation of the West, urging China to learn from foreign models while adapting them to its own unique circumstances. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required both boldness and restraint. In the end, Zheng Guanying's vision was both a reflection of his times and a beacon for the future. He was a man caught between two worlds, striving to reconcile the past with the demands of a rapidly changing present. His proposals for economic modernization were not just about building railways or reforming tariffs. They were about creating a China that could stand on its own in a world increasingly dominated by Western powers. As Zheng penned his ideas, the world around him was changing at a dizzying pace. The Qing dynasty, caught in the crosshairs of history, was ill-equipped to adapt, but Zheng's writings offered a glimpse of what might be possible if only China had the courage to embrace change. His vision was like a lighthouse, guiding those who dared to dream of a different future. And while the Qing court may have been content to drift in the safe harbor of tradition, Zheng's ideas continued to ripple outwards, inspiring a new generation of thinkers and reformers ready to chart a new course for China. Though the journey was fraught with challenges, the seeds of change had been sown, and the echoes of Zheng's vision would resonate for years to come. But as always, history is never a simple tale, and the twists and turns of China's path to modernization were far from over. While Zheng Guanying's ideas were making ripples, the political landscape of China was more of a stagnant pond than a flowing river of innovation. The Qing dynasty was, after all, a regime that preferred its change like it preferred its tea, slowly brewed, and with a heavy dose of tradition. Enter the 100 Days Reform of 1898, a whirlwind attempt to modernize China that made the average tick-tock challenge seem like a long-term commitment. Picture this: a group of reform-minded intellectuals, Zheng among them, ready to shake the dust off the old empire and drag it kicking and screaming into the modern age. Their leader, the Guangxu Emperor, was a young ruler with stars in his eyes and reform on his mind. He envisioned a China where the bureaucracy wasn't just a job creation scheme for the well-connected, but a streamlined machine of progress. His goal, to transform China in a mere 100 days, about as realistic as expecting a couch potato to become an Olympic athlete after a weekend yoga retreat. Zheng Guanying was not just a cheerleader on the sidelines. He was a key player in this radical reform movement. His ideas were a blueprint for the economic and administrative changes that the Guangxu Emperor sought to implement. The reform agenda read like Zheng's own wish list: modernizing the military, overhauling the education system, and here's a shocker: encouraging industrialization. Unfortunately, the Qing court had all the enthusiasm of a cat faced with a vacuum cleaner. The 100 Days Reform was an ambitious project, but it was also a political high-wire act without a safety net. The conservative faction at court, led by the formidable Empress Dowager Cixi, was about as receptive to change as a brick wall is to a paint job. Cixi, a shrewd political operator with a talent for survival, viewed the reforms as a direct threat to her power. She wasn't about to let a bunch of upstart reformers upend the status quo she had so meticulously crafted over decades. Zheng's involvement in the reform movement was both his moment in the sun and his undoing. As ideas flew like arrows in an ancient battle, he found himself in the crosshairs of political intrigue. The reformers were like a band of hopeful musicians, each playing their own tune, while the conductor tried to create harmony in a cacophonous court. The 100 Days Reform, alas, was less of a symphony and more of a swan song. It was abruptly halted by Cixi, who staged a coup that put the young emperor under house arrest. The reformers, including Zheng, were scattered like autumn leaves, their dreams of a modern China left to wither on the vine. Cixi's return to power was a stark reminder that in the Qing court, idealism was often a luxury few could afford. For Zheng, the collapse of the reform was a bitter pill to swallow. His visionary ideas, which had seemed so full of promise, were now relegated to the dusty shelves of history, a reminder that being ahead of your time often means waiting for the world to catch up. The cost of his idealism was steep: political exile and the realization that the Qing dynasty was as likely to embrace reform as a fish was to climb a tree. Yet, even in defeat, Zheng's influence lingered like the echo of a distant gong. While his dreams of immediate reform were dashed, his writings continued to inspire future generations. He became something of a mentor to younger reformers, a sage whose words carried the weight of experience. His interactions with other reform-minded individuals, like Kang Yaowei and Liang Qichao, were lessons in resilience and adaptability. Kang Yaowei, a fellow reformer, once remarked on Zheng's unwavering dedication to change, likening him to a lighthouse in a stormy sea. Meanwhile, Liang Qichao, a fiery intellectual, found in Zheng's writings a kindred spirit, someone who understood the delicate balance between tradition and progress. Their correspondence was a testament to the power of ideas to transcend political setbacks, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of a failed revolution. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Zheng's influence was more of a gentle nudge than a seismic shift. The Qing dynasty, in its twilight years, was a creaky old ship taking on water faster than it could bail. Yet, Zheng's ideas persisted, quietly seeping into the consciousness of a nation on the brink of monumental change. The legacy of Zheng Guanying is a cautionary tale about the cost of political idealism in a conservative regime. His story is a poignant reminder that being a visionary isn't just about seeing the future. It's about enduring the present with grace and tenacity. In a world not yet ready for change, Zheng remained steadfast, his pen a sword against the apathy of the age. As the 20th century dawned, China was on the cusp of revolution, and the seeds of reform sown by Zheng and his contemporaries began to take root. His influence, though limited in his lifetime, was a quiet force that shaped the path of modern China. The 100 Days' reform may have been a fleeting moment in history, but its echoes would reverberate through the decades, a testament to the enduring power of visionary thinking. In the grand tapestry of history, Zheng Guanying's story is a vivid thread woven through the fabric of a nation in flux. His impact on the political landscape was both profound and subtle, a testament to the complexity of change in a world clinging to the past. As the winds of revolution began to stir, Zheng's legacy was a beacon for those who dared to dream of a different future. And while his reformist dreams may have crumbled, his vision for a modern China laid the groundwork for the transformations yet to come. But remember, this is just the beginning of the story. History, after all, has a way of surprising us with its twists and turns. Zheng Guanying's story may have seemed like a footnote to the grand narrative of China's tumultuous journey through the 19th and 20th centuries, but as history has a knack for doing, it threw a curveball. Fast forward to contemporary China, a nation that's sprinting through modernization like an Olympic runner who just realized they're one lap behind. As skyscrapers pierce the clouds and bullet trains zip through valleys, Zheng's ideas are rediscovered, like a dusty treasure map found in a forgotten attic. This isn't just a case of historical déjà vu. It's a testament to the staying power of visionary thinking. Now, let's clear the air. The romantic notion that Zheng was some kind of Nostradamus of the East is a bit far-fetched. He wasn't gazing into a crystal ball, predicting every twist and turn of China's modernization. But his writings, once dismissed as fanciful musings, have been reinterpreted as early blueprints for economic and social reform. Take his call for infrastructure development. In today's China, where the railway network stretches over 146,000 kilometers and counting, Zheng's vision of connectivity feels less like a dream and more like a prophecy fulfilled. In the realm of economic policy, Zheng's advocacy for trade reform and industrialization resonates in China's current status as a global manufacturing powerhouse. Let's crunch some numbers. In 2022, China's exports reached a staggering $36 trillion, a figure that would have made Zheng's eyes pop in disbelief. His ideas about opening China to the world are now echoed in its Belt and Road Initiative, a modern-day Silk Road that's about as subtle as a bull in a china shop. It's a global strategy that Zheng would have likely appreciated, even if he might have raised an eyebrow at some of the geopolitical chess moves involved. Yet, while Zheng's visions have found a new home in the annals of modern Chinese policy, it's important to remember the backdrop against which they were conceived. The Qing dynasty, with its labyrinthine bureaucracy and resistance to change, was less of a supportive environment and more of a historical deadweight. The irony isn't lost on historians. Zheng's ideas, born out of frustration with an empire that couldn't see past its own nose, are now part of the doctrine of a nation forging ahead with unprecedented speed. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of redemption. The reality is that Zheng's journey was filled with more potholes than a country road after a monsoon. His ideas, while visionary, were not without their flaws. The notion of importing Western technology wholesale without considering the cultural and social implications was a gamble that could have easily gone awry. The modern China we see today has not only embraced technological and economic innovation, but has also grappled with the social upheavals and environmental challenges that come with such rapid development. In the corridors of power, Zheng's legacy is like a whisper from the past, urging caution even as the nation accelerates into the future. His call for balance between tradition and innovation, between economic growth and social stability, remains as relevant as ever. And while modern policymakers might not name-drop Zheng at cocktail parties, his influence is there, woven into the fabric of China's developmental strategies like an unseen thread in a vast tapestry. Let's not forget the human element in this saga. Zheng Guanying was, after all, a dreamer, and history has a soft spot for dreamers. His ideas didn't just vanish into the ether. They were picked up by later reformers who, standing on his shoulders, peered further into the future. Figures like Sun Yat-sen, the founding father of the Republic of China, were inspired by the groundwork Zheng laid. Sun's own vision for a modern, industrialized China was in part a continuation of Zheng's imaginative efforts. In the end, Zheng's story is a reminder that history often reserves its warmest corners for those who dare to dream, even if their aspirations seem as implausible as pigs flying. His legacy is not just about the ideas he penned, but about the spirit of resilience and innovation he embodied, a spirit that resonates in the concrete and steel of China's modern cities and in the determined faces of its people. As we wrap up this historical jaunt through Zheng Guanying's life and legacy, let's indulge in a bit of humor. Picture Zheng, seated in a cozy armchair in some ethereal afterlife, sipping tea and watching modern China unfold with a bemused smile. He'd likely chuckle at the irony of it all, perhaps offering a wry comment or two about the bureaucrats who once scoffed at his ideas, now standing in awe of the nation's achievements. The tale of Zheng Guanying is a tapestry woven with ambition, innovation, and a fair share of historical irony. His journey from a young boy in Guangdong dreaming of a modern China to a reformer whose ideas would outlast the Qing dynasty is a testament to the enduring power of visionary thinking. While his dreams didn't always pan out as planned, they laid the groundwork for the future and inspired generations to keep the flame of reform alive. So, as you drift off to sleep with these new nuggets of knowledge gently simmering in your mind, remember Zheng Guanying, not just as a historical figure, but as a symbol of the timeless dance between tradition and change. History may not always be kind to its dreamers, but it never forgets them. And sometimes, just sometimes, it gives them a knowing wink and a nod, as if to say, you were onto something all along. In the crisp morning air of an 8th century Viking village, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil rings out like a heavy metal concert. This isn't just noise, it's the sound of industry, the heartbeat of Viking expansion. You're smack dab in the middle of a culture that, despite its brand image as marauding warriors, owes much of its success to the unsung heroes, blacksmiths. Forget the traditional Viking image of long-haired brutes with axes. Today, we're diving into the world of those who actually made those axes. Let's set the scene. The year is 793 AD, a date that, thanks to the raid on Lindisfarne, marks the Viking Age's roaring debut on history's stage. Yet, while monks were busy lamenting their newfound Viking problem, blacksmiths were back home, crafting the very tools that made those raids possible. Blacksmiths were the engineers of their day, crucial to the economic and military might of Viking society. Without their skillful hands, Viking ships might very well have stayed docked, and their warriors would look a lot less intimidating. Imagine a Viking without his sword, like a modern soldier without his smartphone. Now, you might think of blacksmiths as just guys with soot-covered faces swinging hammers, but in this world, they were more like rock stars. Their skills were indispensable, not just for forging weapons and armor, but also for creating everyday tools and even intricate pieces of jewelry that were the bling of the Viking world. Blacksmithing was like the Silicon Valley of the Viking Age, a hub of innovation and expertise that underpinned the entire economy. The tools of their trade were both simple and sophisticated. An anvil, a hammer, tongs, and a forge. These were the essentials. The forge was the blacksmith's kitchen, where charcoal was the main ingredient. Wood was plentiful, but it had to be converted into charcoal to reach the high temperatures needed to manipulate metal. And let's talk about the metal. Iron was the bread and butter, imported or scavenged from various locations, with some local barg iron thrown in for good measure. And here's a kicker for you. While we often think of Vikings as DIY types, their iron wasn't always homegrown. They traded far and wide. Evidence shows they imported iron from as far away as the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Trade routes snaked across continents, making the Vikings the original globetrotters. The economic importance of a blacksmith went beyond the village. His work affected trade routes, influenced political alliances, and even dictated the success of a raid. But let's not romanticize too much. The life of a blacksmith wasn't all glory and gold. It was a hard, sweaty, and dangerous job. Imagine working in a room that's essentially a sauna, with the constant threat of burns and injuries. Yet, despite the grime and grit, blacksmiths often held a surprisingly high social status. They were respected members of the community, akin to modern-day engineers or IT specialists. No one truly understands what they do, but everyone knows they're essential. Now, let's tackle one of those pesky myths head-on. The idea that Vikings were all about brute strength and violence. Sure, they had their moments, but the success of their raids and expansions was as much about strategy and technology as it was about brawn. Blacksmiths were the original tech support for these operations. Without well-crafted weapons and reliable tools, those legendary Viking raids would have been about as successful as a ship without a sail. The blacksmith's knowledge was passed down through generations, often within families, preserving their craft like a secret recipe. It's like the Viking version of a family-owned tech startup. They were part of a network of craftsmen that extended across the Viking world, a community interconnected by trade, skill, and necessity. And while their work was demanding, it also allowed them to travel, to learn, to exchange ideas, making them some of the most worldly individuals of the time. As you stand in the forge's glow, watching the blacksmith shape a piece of red-heart metal, you're witnessing the alchemy of the Viking Age. This is more than just metalwork. It's the creation of objects that will shape history. These aren't just tools and weapons. They are the foundation of a society that would leave a lasting mark on Europe and beyond. So, next time you hear about a Viking raid, remember the unsung artisans who made it all possible, the blacksmiths who turned raw iron into the stuff of legend. So, as you stand in the forge's glow, witnessing the alchemy of the Viking Age, let's delve deeper into the nitty-gritty of blacksmithing. We're talking about the heavy metal before it was cool, literally. The types of metals these artisans worked with were as varied as a modern-day Spotify playlist. You had your basic barg iron, not glamorous by any stretch. It was the bread and butter of Viking metallurgy. Imagine a muddy, marshy mix that, when processed, could be transformed into something as vital as a sword or a plowshare. Now, barg iron was the local stuff, your farm-to-table iron, if you will. It formed naturally in waterlogged environments, kind of like how a pearl forms in an oyster, but less shiny and more, well, muddy. This iron wasn't the best quality, but it was accessible, and with the right amount of elbow grease, could be smelted into usable metal. And when I say elbow grease, I mean a process that was as labor-intensive as a CrossFit workout and just as sweaty. But the real luxury metal of the time, steel. Oh yes, steel was the VIP section of the Viking material world. Creating steel involved a delicate dance of adding carbon to iron in just the right amount. Too little, and you've got iron. Too much, and your metal is as brittle as a New Year's resolution by February. Achieving that perfect balance required skill and knowledge, passed down like a family heirloom. The blacksmiths who could work with steel were the bay and say of their craft, respected, admired, and a bit of a mystery to those who didn't understand the process. Crafting a weapon wasn't just about hammering metal into shape. It was a symphony of processes. You started with the smelting, where iron ore was heated beyond the point of no return, removing impurities and fetching out the raw metal. Then came the forging, a rhythmic pounding that shaped the metal into something recognizable and useful. For those keeping track, That's hours of back-breaking labor in a room harder than 1,000 suns, or at least what felt like it. And here's a fun fact. A single Viking sword could take weeks to craft. This wasn't some assembly line operation. Each weapon was a bespoke creation, a testament to the blacksmith's skill and dedication. These swords weren't just tools of war, they were works of art, each with its own personality and story. The cost of a sword could be equivalent to buying a small herd of cattle or even a modest plot of land. That's why owning a sword was as much about status as it was about function. It was like having the latest iPhone, except it could split a shield in two. The value of these weapons wasn't just monetary, it was also symbolic. A well-crafted sword was a sign of power and prestige, a physical manifestation of a warrior's prowess. And let's be real, nothing says, I mean business, quite like a gleaming sword hanging at your side. Axes and helmets, though less glamorous than swords, were equally vital. Axes were versatile tools. They could chop wood, build homes, and when necessary, do a number on an enemy in battle. Helmets, crafted with care, were the ultimate headgear, a blend of protection and intimidation. A well-made helmet could mean the difference between life and death, which is kind of a big deal when you think about it. Now, let's debunk one of those persistent myths, the horned helmet. Spoiler alert, Vikings didn't wear them. Sure, they look cool in operas and on football team mascots, but in reality, they would have been impractical and downright dangerous in battle. Imagine trying to swing a sword with horns getting caught in everything. The real helmets were more like the medieval equivalent of a high-tech bike helmet, designed for protection, not flair. So, why was all this metalwork worth the effort and expense? Simple. It was the backbone of Viking society. Weapons and tools forged by blacksmiths enabled exploration, conquest, and trade. They were the building blocks of an empire. The blacksmiths, with soot-streaked faces and muscle-bound arms, were the unsung architects of the Viking expansion. They were the quiet geniuses behind the scenes, powering a society that would leave an indelible mark on history. As you ponder the blacksmith's world, remember that every clang of hammer on metal was a step toward something greater. A simple piece of iron, transformed by fire and skill, could change the course of a life, or a nation. These artisans weren't just shaping metal, they were shaping the future. And that, my friend, is the real magic of blacksmithing. As the forge cools, let's take a stroll beyond its fiery confines and into the bustling hubbub of Viking trade. Forget the image of Vikings as mere plunderers. These folks were also the OG entrepreneurs. Picture them not just as raiders with axes, but as traders wielding scales. Blacksmiths weren't just hammering out weapons for warfare. They were crafting the very tools that powered an economy stretching from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the sun-baked deserts of the Middle East. Now, if you've ever marveled at the Viking knack for navigation, thank a blacksmith. Those sleek longships slicing through the waves like butter, they didn't just pop out of nowhere. Blacksmiths forged the nails, rivets, and even the metal fittings that held these wooden marvels together. Without them, the whole operation would have been about as seaworthy as a paper boat in a monsoon. The Viking trade network was like the Silk Road with a sea breeze. These Norsemen, with their flaxen beards and insatiable wanderlust, were the original globetrotters of the medieval world. We're talking about trade routes sprawling from Newfoundland. That's right, they got to North America way before Columbus, to the opulent markets of Constantinople. And here's a plot twist. They weren't just swapping goods like swords and furs. They were also trafficking in luxury items. Think silks from China, spices from India, and silver from the Abbasid Caliphate. This trade was a two-way street, with the Vikings exporting goods like walrus ivory and amber that would make any medieval merchant drool. The blacksmith's handiwork was the foundation of these exchanges. Iron was the currency of the realm, the Bitcoin of the Viking Age. It was traded, bartered, and sometimes even used as a makeshift commodity currency. A single iron ingot could be worth as much as a dozen sheep or a prime plot of land. So, while your average Viking might dream of raiding a monastery for its gold, the savvy trader was eyeing the iron as a solid investment. But let's not get too romantic here. Viking trade wasn't all smooth sailing and friendly handshakes. It was a high-stakes game of risk and reward, where the line between trader and raider was as thin as a blade. Picture this. You're a merchant sailing into a foreign port, your ship heavy with goods, when suddenly the locals decide they'd rather take your wares by force than pay for them. The Vikings had to be ready to defend their cargo at the drop of a hat. or helmet. And about those helmets, let's clear up a common misconception. While our horned friends have become the poster boys of Viking iconography, in reality, Vikings were more practical than theatrical. Helmets were meticulously crafted for real protection, no horns in sight, just good old-fashioned metalwork to keep you alive when negotiations turned sour. The blacksmith's role in this economy wasn't just about producing goods, but also about maintaining them. Viking ships, for instance, required constant upkeep. A broken rivet or a worn-out nail could spell disaster on the high seas. Blacksmiths were the unsung heroes, pit crews of the Viking trade circuit, ensuring that vessels stayed seaworthy and merchants stayed in business. The geographical reach of Viking trade was staggering. They navigated the Volga River to the Caspian Sea, mingled in the bazaars of Baghdad, and returned with tales and treasures that would fuel the fires of their home economies. These voyages weren't just about acquiring wealth. They were about exchanging knowledge, ideas, and technology. The Vikings were cultural magpies, picking up innovations and incorporating them into their own society. In many ways, they were the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley tech bros, constantly on the lookout for the next big thing. Let's not forget the economic backbone provided by those back home. While Vikings were off exploring and trading, their communities were hard at work producing goods to be bartered abroad. The blacksmiths, with their forges blazing, were at the heart of this domestic economy. They provided the tools for farming, the nails for shipbuilding, and the weapons for defense, all essential for a thriving community. Now, here's a nugget to chew on. The Viking Age wasn't just about expansion through conquest, but also through integration. Many of the settlements established by Vikings became melting pots of cultures, where Norse customs blended with local traditions. This cultural exchange was a two-way street, enriching both Viking society and the communities they came into contact with. The blacksmiths, as producers of goods that facilitated trade, played a crucial role in these exchanges. But of course, not every venture was a success story. The harsh realities of medieval life meant that many voyages ended in disaster, whether due to storms, disease, or hostile encounters. The romantic image of the Viking adventurer often glosses over these grim details. For every successful trade mission, there were likely several that ended in tragedy, with ships lost at sea and men never returning home. So, as you stand on the shore, watching a fleet of longships disappear into the horizon, think about the network of craftsmen, traders, and warriors that made such journeys possible. The blacksmiths, with their soot-streaked faces and calloused hands, were the unsung architects of this vast and interconnected world. They were the ones who turned raw materials into the tools of trade and conquest, enabling the Vikings to leave their mark on history. As we wrap up this leg of our journey through the Viking Age, keep in mind the dual nature of these Norsemen. They were raiders and traders, warriors and craftsmen, adventurers and settlers. And at the heart of it all were the blacksmiths, quietly shaping the metal and the destiny of a people who would be remembered long after their ships had vanished from the seas. But there's still more to explore, so stick around as we delve deeper into the world of the Vikings and their indelible impact on history. Now, let's step off the docks and into the smoky embrace of the Viking forge, where the clang of metal on metal is practically a spiritual chant. In the Viking world, blacksmiths weren't just craftsmen. They were the magicians of metal, the rock stars of the runes. The Norse pantheon had its fair share of celestial characters, but for blacksmiths, one deity stood out. Thor, the hammer-wielding god whose very weapon, Mjolnir, was the product of divine metallurgy. Thor's hammer wasn't just any old tool. It was the cosmic Swiss army knife, capable of leveling mountains and returning to his hand like the ultimate boomerang. According to myth, Mjolnir was crafted by the dwarven brothers Sindri and Braka, whose skills would put even the most seasoned blacksmiths to shame. This was the stuff of legends, literally and figuratively, showcasing the revered place of craftsmanship in Norse culture. The Vikings might have been known for their raids, but they also had a soft spot for a good origin story, especially if it involved a bit of hammer time. But hold your horses, or should I say, hold your longships, before we get too misty-eyed over myth. These tales served a purpose beyond entertainment. They affirmed the blacksmith's role as a vital cog in the societal wheel. In an age where gods needed weaponry just as much as mortals, the blacksmith was the bridge between the divine and the earthly. His forge was a sacred space, akin to a temple where the divine spark of creativity met the raw, unyielding nature of metal. Now, you might be wondering, did blacksmiths in Viking society actually believe they were channeling divine power as they hammered away? Well, not exactly. But they were certainly seen as people who had a foot in both worlds, the everyday and the mystical. Superstitions ran rampant in those smoky forges, with rituals and taboos as integral to the process as the metal itself. Consider this. A blacksmith might whisper charms to his tools or leave offerings to appease the spirits of the forge. It was a bit like the medieval version of crossing your fingers or knocking on wood, but with more soot and singed eyebrows. Blacksmiths were also regarded with a mix of respect and fear, a duality as sharp as a newly forged blade. On one hand, they were indispensable. Try ploughing a field or raiding a monastery without their work, and you'd end up with a very disappointed Viking chief. On the other hand, their ability to shape metal seemed almost otherworldly, and anything that dances that close to the mystical realm tends to make people a tad uneasy. It's no surprise, then, that blacksmiths often found themselves in the role of local shamans or wise men, with their knowledge of metallurgy seen as a form of secret wisdom. In the societal pecking order, blacksmiths occupied a unique niche. They were neither at the top nor the bottom, but rather somewhere in between, like a celebrity chef whose work everyone enjoys but no one fully understands. They had a certain autonomy, their services in such high demand that they could often name their price, whether it be in silver, livestock, or a share of the spoils from a successful raid. This economic leverage gave them a degree of independence that was rare in a society where most people were tied to the land or to a chieftain's whims. But let's not gloss over the grim realities. The forge was a dangerous place, a cauldron of fire and molten metal where a single misstep could result in disaster. There were no OSHA regulations back then, no eye protection, no gloves, just raw skill and a healthy respect for the elements at play. Injuries were common, and a serious burn or a slip of the hammer could end a blacksmith's career faster than you can say Valhalla. Yet, despite these hazards, the allure of the forge was strong, drawing in those who sought both the challenge and the promise of creating something that would outlast them. While we're on the subject of enduring legacies, let's debunk another myth, the notion that Vikings were cultural Philistines, interested only in conquest and pillage. In reality, they were as much creators as they were destroyers, with a cultural tapestry as rich as their trade routes. Their art, from intricate jewelry to ornately carved ships, reflected a deep appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship. And at the heart of this artistic expression was the blacksmith, whose work was both functional and symbolic. Take, for instance, the practice of inscribing weapons with runes. These were more than just decorative flourishes. They were believed to imbue the object with protective powers or to invoke the favor of the gods. A sword might bear the runic inscription for protection, blessing its wielder with both physical and spiritual strength. It's like tattooing your lucky charm onto your weapon, a blend of art, belief, and practicality that was uniquely Viking. So, as you stand there, feeling the heat of the forge and the weight of history, remember that blacksmithing was as much a spiritual endeavor as it was a craft. Each piece of metal that emerged from the flames was a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest to leave a mark on the world. The blacksmiths of the Viking Age were more than just metal workers. They were the architects of myth, the custodians of tradition, and the silent witnesses to the ebb and flow of a civilization that would shape the course of history. But our story doesn't end here. We've got more ground to cover, more myths to bust, and more tales to tell as we continue to explore the Viking Age and its indelible impact on the world. So stick around, because the saga is far from over, and I promise you, it's one worth hearing. As we sail into the final chapter of our Viking saga, let's zoom out and gaze at the sprawling legacy left by these Norse artisans. You see, blacksmiths weren't just clanging away in smoky solitude. They were crafting the very heartbeat of a culture that would ripple across Europe and beyond. Their influence was like a stone tossed into the ocean, each splash creating waves that would lap onto distant shores. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and the echoes of Viking craftsmanship were still resonating. Medieval Europe was like a kid in a candy store, borrowing from the Viking playbook of metallurgy and shipbuilding. Viking swords, with their distinctive pattern-welded blades, came the gold standard, coveted by knights and nobles alike. These swords were not just weapons, they were the Ferraris of their time, a status symbol that said, "I've got power, and I'm not afraid to wield it." The Frankish knight with a Viking sword at his side was akin to a modern-day executive flaunting a limited edition Rolex. And let's talk about trade. The Vikings' expansive network laid the groundwork for what would become the intricate tapestry of medieval commerce. From the bustling markets of Dublin to the opulent bazaars of Constantinople, Viking trade routes were like the ancient world's internet, connecting cultures and ideas at a speed that would make even a fiber-optic cable blush. The exchange of goods and technology didn't just enrich coffers, it also enriched minds, sparking the kind of cross-cultural fertilization that would eventually lead to the Renaissance. But every golden age has its sunset, and the Viking era was no exception. By the late 11th century, the tides were turning. The rise of centralized kingdoms, along with the spread of Christianity, began to reshape the Scandinavian world. Vikings were trading in their longships for plows, and their once-feared raiding parties became quaint tales of the past. The blacksmiths, too, found their roles evolving. As societies shifted from tribal to feudal systems, the demand for weapons of war gave way to the need for agricultural tools and domestic implements. The forge's fiery glow dimmed as the clang of battle was replaced by the hum of the harvest. The transformation of blacksmithing in the Middle Ages wasn't just about changing tools, it was about adapting to a new world order. The blacksmith's forge became a cornerstone of the medieval village, a place where the needs of everyday life were met with skill and precision. Iron plowshares replaced Viking swords, and horseshoes became as essential as the latest app on your smartphone. Blacksmiths were still key players, but now they were forging the tools of peace rather than war. Yet, even in this new era, the mythic allure of the Vikings lingered. The image of the fierce Norseman, hammer in hand, continued to captivate the medieval imagination. Chronicles and sagas, penned by monks and storytellers, painted a picture of Vikings as larger-than-life figures, equal parts hero and villain, revered for their bravery and feared for their ferocity. These stories were like medieval blockbusters, complete with epic battles and legendary heroes, stirring the hearts of audiences who longed for a taste of the wild and untamed. But hold on to your horned helmets. Let's debunk another romanticized notion. The idea of Vikings as noble savages, living by a code of honor, is about as factual as believing dragons once roamed the earth. In reality, the Viking world was a complex tapestry of alliances, betrayals, and shifting loyalties. It was less about chivalry and more about survival, where the line between friend and foe was often as blurry as a foggy fjord. The legacy of Viking blacksmiths is a testament to the enduring power of craftsmanship. Their work influenced not just the tools of war, but the very fabric of medieval society. From the iron nails that held together the ships of explorers to the plows that tilled the fields of Europe, Viking metallurgy was the unsung hero of an era that straddled the line between the ancient and the modern. As we wrap up our journey through the smoky forges and stormy seas of the Viking Age, let's reflect on the enduring myths versus the practical realities of this fascinating era. The romantic image of the Viking warrior, axe in hand, sailing off into the sunset, is a compelling one. But behind the legend lies a more nuanced truth. The Vikings were as much builders as they were destroyers, as much traders as they were raiders. And at the heart of it all were the blacksmiths, the quiet architects of a legacy that would echo through the annals of history. Understanding the everyday work of Viking blacksmiths gives us a deeper insight into a culture that was both feared and admired. Their craftsmanship was a bridge between worlds, past and present, myth and reality. So, as you drift off into the realm of dreams, let the clang of the hammer and the glow of the forge guide you through the misty halls of history, where the past is never quite as far away as it seems. Florence Nightingale wasn't just the lady with the lamp who brightened the dingy halls of the Crimean War hospitals. She was, in fact, the ultimate 19th century rebel with a cause. Born on May 12, 1820, in Florence, Italy, Florence inherited her name from the city of her birth. Because why not make sure everyone knows you were born in style? Her parents, William and Frances Nightingale, were no strangers to luxury. They owned not one, but two sprawling estates in England, Lea Hurst in Derbyshire and in Bly Park in Hampshire. We're talking about a family that probably had more silver spoons than they could ever use, yet Florence had a knack for wanting to stir the pot with them. Florence's upbringing was the epitome of the Victorian elite. Think fancy balls, endless tea parties, and a social calendar busier than a modern influencer's Instagram. Her early education was rigorous, courtesy of her father, who was quite the intellectual himself. He taught her classics, philosophy, and mathematics, subjects considered rather radical for a woman at the time. But Florence had the kind of mind that could have outdone the latest artificial intelligence in a trivia contest. By the time she was in her teens, she was fluent in French, German, and Italian. This was a girl who could probably have ordered a croissant in Paris and then critiqued it in 3 languages. Yet, despite the cushy life, Florence felt a different calling. At 17, she experienced what she described as a divine calling to serve others, which was as unladylike as it got in Victorian England. You see, the social expectation for a young lady of her standing was to marry well and host the best garden parties, not to poke around in the grimy world of hospitals. But Florence had other ideas. She saw nursing as a noble profession, a revolutionary thought considering that at the time, nurses were often depicted as untrained, unkempt, and let's be honest, usually drunk. The decision to pursue nursing was akin to announcing she was running away to join the circus. Florence's parents were less than thrilled. Her mother, Frances, likely had visions of Florence gracing the front pages of Tatler, not the back alleys of a hospital. William, perhaps more understanding, but still firmly entrenched in societal norms, tried to steer her towards more respectable endeavors, like marrying a nice gentleman with a decent title. But Florence had the tenacity of a bulldog in a butcher's shop. She was determined to follow her calling, no matter how many feathers it ruffled in the Nightingale household. In 1849, Florence traveled to Germany to visit Kaiserswerth, a Protestant institution that trained deaconesses as nurses. It was here that she got her first real taste of nursing, and it was like discovering chocolate, life-changing. She returned to England with her resolve only strengthened, much to her family's dismay. Unfazed by their objections, Florence continued her education and began to network with influential figures who could help her cause. Among these was Sidney Herbert, the Secretary of War, who would let her play a crucial role in her career. Florence's rebellion against societal norms wasn't just limited to her career choice. She had a penchant for challenging authority in all its forms. Once, during a visit to Egypt, she decided to ride a donkey through the streets of Cairo, scandalous behavior for an English lady at the time. But Florence wasn't one to let Victorian propriety get in the way of a good adventure. She was, in many respects, a feminist before feminism was a thing, advocating for women's education and independence long before it became a fashionable cause. Her first official foray into the world of healthcare came when she was appointed as the superintendent of the institution for the care of sick gentlewomen in distressed circumstances in London in 1853. The position was unpaid, because, of course, why would a woman need money for her work? Despite this, Florence threw herself into the role with the kind of energy that would make a caffeine addict look sluggish. She improved sanitation, reorganized the hospital staff, and implemented record-keeping systems that were as precise as a Swiss watch. Florence's efforts soon caught the attention of the wider medical community. Her skills were undeniable, and her reputation began to grow. Yet, it remained a challenging path. The medical profession was dominated by men who were about as welcoming as a pit of rattlesnakes, but Florence had a way of circumventing obstacles. She'd often use humor and intellect to win over skeptics and charm her way into the circles of power. Her work at the institution was just a preview of the seismic impact she would later have on healthcare. Florence Nightingale's early life was a series of defiant steps against the prescribed roles of her time. She was a woman who could have had everything handed to her on a silver platter, but chose to forge her own destiny instead. Her journey from the drawing rooms of Derbyshire to the hospital wards would not only redefine nursing, but also challenge the very fabric of Victorian society. And as we delve deeper into her story, we see that the myth of the lady with the lamp is only the tip of an iceberg made of grit, determination, and a healthy dose of rebellion. Florence Nightingale's journey to the Crimean War was not the romantic, lantern-lit stroll that Victorian law might have you believe. It was more like a plunge into the chaotic heart of a 19th century medical horror show. The year was 1854, and the British Army had found itself knee-deep in conflict with Russia over the control of the Ottoman Empire's territories. Cue the drums of war and the inevitable scramble to send troops to the front lines. The British government, in all its wisdom, hadn't quite prepared for the little details, like, say, ensuring that soldiers didn't die of disease faster than they could be shot by enemy fire. Enter Florence, the woman of the hour, who was about to revolutionize this grim scenario. She was appointed to lead a team of 38 nurses to the Crimean front, thanks to her connection with Sidney Herbert, the Secretary of War. Clearly, Herbert had more faith in Florence's abilities than many of his contemporaries. At the time, the idea of sending female nurses to a war zone was about as popular as a sandstorm at a picnic. Nevertheless, Florence and her team set sail for Scutari, now part of Istanbul, which was the main British base in the war. Upon arrival, the sight that greeted them was enough to make even the most stalwart soul wince. The military hospitals were a veritable smorgasbord of filth and disease. Soldiers lay packed together like sardines in a can, their wounds festering in an atmosphere riddled with the stench of unwashed bodies and open latrines. It was a setting straight out of a horror movie, complete with rats and fleas that would have made any pest control expert throw up their hands in despair. Florence, however, was not one to be deterred by a little, or a lot, of mess. Armed with her background in mathematics and a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, she set to work. One of her first moves was to gather data on mortality rates, which were skyrocketing faster than a Victorian gentleman's top hat in a gust of wind. The numbers told a grim tale. More soldiers were dying from diseases like typhus, cholera, and dysentery than from actual combat injuries. Florence used this data to push for sanitary reforms, a move that was both revolutionary and necessary. Now, if you think the military brass was thrilled to have a woman, especially one armed with statistics, telling them how to run their hospitals, think again. Florence was often met with resistance from officials who were about as supportive as a house of cards in a hurricane. Nevertheless, she persisted. With steely determination, she implemented measures to improve sanitation, including the installation of proper ventilation systems and the rigorous cleaning of wards. The results were nothing short of miraculous. Mortality rates dropped from 42% to 2% within months, a testament to what a little soap and common sense could achieve. Despite her success, Florence's reception was a mixed bag. The press, always on the hunt for a good story, latched onto her image as the lady with the lamp, a sort of saintly figure gliding through the wards at night to comfort the wounded. It was a narrative that captured the public's imagination, but did little to convey the gritty reality of her work. While the legend of the lamp was romantic, the truth was that Florence was a powerhouse of data-driven reform, a fact often overshadowed by her more poetic portrayal. Back home, she was both celebrated and criticized. Some saw her as a pioneering heroine, while others dismissed her efforts as meddling. Her relationship with the military hierarchy was particularly fraught. Many officials viewed her as an unwelcome disruptor, a woman who dared to challenge the status quo with her pesky insistence on hygiene and statistics. Yet, Florence was not easily dissuaded. She had the tenacity of a dog with a bone, refusing to back down in the face of opposition. Florence's mathematical prowess was not just a footnote in her story. It was her secret weapon. She used her skills to create what we might today call data visualization, transforming complex statistics into clear, compelling graphics that even the most obstinate bureaucrat could understand. Her coxcomb diagrams, a precursor to the modern pie chart, vividly illustrated the impact of sanitary conditions on soldier mortality. It was a masterstroke of persuasion, one that left little room for argument. While Florence was busy revolutionizing military healthcare, the wider world began to take notice. Her work in Crimea set off ripples that would eventually lead to far-reaching reforms in public health. She became a consultant on sanitation in India and helped establish the first secular nursing school at St. Thomas Hospital in London in 1860. Her impact was felt not only in the confines of war, but in the broader sphere of healthcare, where her principles of sanitation and patient care would lay the groundwork for modern nursing. Despite these victories, Florence remained a somewhat polarizing figure. The Victorian press was a fickle beast, prone to building heroes up only to knock them down again. While she was often hailed as a national treasure, there were those who continued to grumble about her influence. The military establishment, in particular, had a love-hate relationship with her. She was both a revered figure and a thorn in their side, a woman who dared to challenge the male-dominated world of military medicine. In the end, Florence Nightingale was a complex tapestry of contradictions, a woman celebrated as a gentle caregiver, yet feared as a formidable reformer. Her legacy is one of both romance and reality, a testament to the power of grit and intellect in the face of overwhelming odds. As we continue to unravel her story, it's clear that the legend of the Lady with the Lamp is just one facet of a life lived on the cutting edge of change. Florence Nightingale wasn't just a beacon in the darkness. She was a force of nature, determined to illuminate the path to better healthcare for all. And as the story unfolds, we see that her journey was only just beginning. And so, with the Crimean War in the rearview mirror, Florence Nightingale returned to England, a bit like a rock star coming home after a world tour, minus the groupies, and with a lot more paperwork. But the real story wasn't just about her triumphant return. It was about what she did next. You see, Florence wasn't planning on just resting on her laurels or her lamp. No, she was gearing up to tackle what would become her greatest challenge, transforming the very fabric of public health. Let's start with the fact that Florence's health took a nosedive post-war. Imagine, if you will, the toll of working 20-hour days in conditions that made a horror movie set look like a 5-star resort. It was enough to leave anyone bedridden, and indeed, Florence spent much of her later life confined to her room. But this is Florence Nightingale we're talking about. She wasn't going to let a little thing like chronic illness stop her. From her sick, she wielded a pen as effectively as she had wielded her lamp, diving deep into research and analysis. Research, the backbone of Florence's post-war influence. She wasn't just any researcher. She was practically the Sherlock Holmes of statistics. Her work with data, particularly her development of the now-famous coxcomb charts, was groundbreaking. These weren't just pretty pictures to hang on a wall. They were vivid, visual representations of mortality statistics that would make even the most data-averse bureaucrats sit up and pay attention. Think of them as the 19th century equivalent of a PowerPoint presentation that actually makes sense. Florence's coxcomb charts detailed the causes of mortality, drawing a stark distinction between deaths from wounds and those from preventable diseases. The charts were a shocking revelation, akin to discovering that most people don't die from shark attacks, but from slipping in the bathtub. Her visual representations made a compelling case for sanitary reform, showing that disease, not battle wounds, was the real killer. And here's where Florence's genius lay. She knew that people in power were more likely to be persuaded by a compelling visual than a mountain of dry data. It was packaging statistics with the kind of flair that would make a modern-day data scientist weep with envy. But Florence wasn't just about charts and graphs. She was about action. She became a forceful advocate for healthcare reform, leveraging her newfound celebrity status to lobby for change. She had her sights set on the establishment of sanitary commissions, and she wasn't about to take no for an answer. Picture a Victorian-era lobbying campaign, complete with letters, meetings, and a level of persistence that could wear down the most steadfast opposition. Florence had a knack for turning even the stiffest upper lip into a nod of agreement. Her lobbying bore fruit. In 1857, the Royal Commission on the Health of the Army was established, largely thanks to her tireless efforts. This was no small feat. It was akin to convincing a stubborn mule to not only budge, but to sprint. The Commission's findings, heavily influenced by Florence's research, led to significant improvements in military medical care. The establishment of the Army Medical College in 1860 was a direct result of these efforts. It was a seismic shift in how the British Army approached healthcare, and it was all driven by a woman who refused to let anything stand in her way, not even her own declining health. Florence's influence wasn't limited to the military. She had plans, big plans, for civilian healthcare reform. She wanted to take the lessons learned from the Crimean War and apply them to hospitals across Britain. Her vision was clear: improve sanitation, reduce mortality, and save lives. It was a vision that required more than just passion. It required cold, hard cash. Here's where Florence's strategic acumen came into play. She was adept at securing funding, often leveraging her connections with the upper echelons of society to rally support for her causes. One of her most significant achievements was the establishment of the Nightingale Training School for nurses at St. Thomas Hospital in 1860. This was revolutionary. Before Florence, nursing was seen as little more than glorified housekeeping, but she transformed it into a respectable profession, one that required skill, training, and dedication. The school became the gold standard for nursing education, setting a precedent that would ripple across the globe. To say that Florence was a pioneer is like saying the ocean is a bit wet. It doesn't quite capture the magnitude of her impact. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with Florence's meddling, reform efforts. There were those who saw her as an overzealous do-gooder, sticking her nose where it didn't belong. But Florence had a thick skin, tougher than a Victorian corset. She was on a mission, and nothing short of a meteor strike was going to stop her. Her work laid the foundation for modern nursing and public health, a legacy that would endure long after the last candle of the 19th century flickered out. Florence's advocacy for sanitary reform extended beyond England's green and pleasant land. She had a global vision, and she set her sights on India, which was then under British rule. The sanitary conditions in India were appalling, and Florence was determined to bring about change. She became a consultant to the British government on matters of health and sanitation in India, using her research to advocate for reforms that would improve the lives of millions. Her work in India was a testament to her belief in the universality of health as a fundamental human right, a notion that was as radical in the 19th century as it is relevant today. She understood that public health wasn't just about treating the sick, it was about preventing illness in the first place. This was a revolutionary concept, one that would shape the future of healthcare policy worldwide. Despite her declining health, Florence continued to wield influence with the tenacity of a terrier with a bone. She corresponded with political leaders, scientists, and healthcare professionals, using her network to spread her ideas far and wide. Her home became a hub of intellectual activity, a place where the brightest minds of the age came to discuss, debate, and learn. Florence Nightingale's post-war period was a study in contrasts, a woman whose body was failing but whose influence was soaring. She was a beacon of change, illuminating the path to better healthcare with her unwavering dedication and sharp intellect. Her story is one of resilience, innovation, and a relentless pursuit of a better world. Yet, as the 19th century marched on, Florence Nightingale was more than just a historical figure. She was a living legend. Her work was revolutionary, and her legacy would endure. But the story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more to explore, as Florence's influence continued to ripple through history, shaping not just the present but the future of healthcare as we know it. Florence Nightingale was the kind of force that could make a hurricane feel like a gentle breeze, especially in her later years. Despite being largely bedridden, she was far from inactive. Think of her as the 19th century equivalent of a social media influencer, minus the selfies, but with a lot more clout. She corresponded with the likes of Queen Victoria, Benjamin Jowett, and even the Viceroy of India, Lord Canning, dispensing advice on everything from military sanitation to public health policy. Her letters were like the Victorian version of a TED talk, insightful, persuasive, and occasionally eyebrow-raising. Let's talk about her role as an advisor on sanitation reforms. You see, Florence had this grand vision, a world where filthy hospital wards and disease-ridden streets became relics of the past. Her work in India was a testament to this vision. She was like a one-woman consultancy firm for the British government, advising on how to improve sanitary conditions across the subcontinent. It was a daunting task, akin to trying to clean up after a herd of elephants in a porcelain shop. But Florence wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. In 1863, she wrote the influential Notes on Sanitary Conditions of India, a report that was part exposé, part blueprint for change. She didn't mince words when it came to pointing out the dire state of public health in India. Her report was as blunt as a Victorian ant after a sherry or two, highlighting the shocking mortality rates due to cholera and malaria. Florence advocated for improved water supply, proper drainage, and better housing, elements that seem like no-brainers today, but were revolutionary back then. Florence's impact on nursing education was no less significant. If her work in India was about turning the ship of public health around, her contributions to nursing were about building the ship in the first place. The Nightingale Training School for Nurses at St. Thomas Hospital became the gold standard for nursing education. By 1887, just 27 years after its founding, the school had trained over 1,000 nurses who were fanning out across the globe, bringing professionalism and competence to a field that desperately needed both. Her stubbornness, however, was legendary. This was a woman who could give a mule a run for its money in the persistence department. She had a knack for ruffling feathers in the corridors of power. Take, for instance, her relentless campaigning for the Sanitary Commission in India. Some officials might have preferred dealing with a nest of vipers to enduring Nightingale's pointed critiques. Yet, her persistence paid off, leading to the establishment of a system of sanitary commissions that would gradually improve living conditions in British-controlled regions. Now, about those myths. Florence Nightingale's life was the stuff of legends, and with legends come embellishments. The lady with the lamp image, for instance, painted her as a gentle, nurturing figure, a sort of Victorian Mother Teresa. While it's true, she did make nightly rounds to comfort wounded soldiers, the reality was far more complex. She was also a hard-nosed administrator who could argue a point like a seasoned barrister. The lamp was a symbol of compassion, but it was her sharp mind and strategic acumen that truly illuminated the path to reform. Her reputation as a saintly figure was both a blessing and a curse. It gave her the platform she needed to push for change, but it also overshadowed her scientific and administrative brilliance. It's like remembering Einstein only for his hair. The truth is, Florence was a pioneer of evidence-based practice long before it became a buzzword in healthcare circles. She wielded statistics like a warrior brandishes a sword, making the case for sanitary reforms with unassailable logic. The economic context of her work cannot be overstated. The British government was notoriously tight-fisted when it came to spending on healthcare reforms, especially in the colonies. Yet Florence managed to pry open the purse strings by demonstrating that prevention was cheaper than cure. Her reports were peppered with cost-benefit analyses that could make a spreadsheet weep with gratitude. For every pound spent on sanitation, she argued, the savings in reduced mortality would more than pay for the investment. It was a masterclass in fiscal persuasion, and it worked. Florence's correspondence was like a game of chess, always 3 moves ahead. She knew how to play the political game, aligning herself with influential figures who could champion her causes. Her letters were a cocktail of charm and strategic nudging, often leaving her correspondents with no choice but to see things her way. It's a testament to her influence that she could sway decisions from afar, her pen as mighty as any sword wielded on the battlefield. As the years rolled on, Nightingale's legacy continued to grow like a well-watered plant. She was awarded the Royal Red Cross in 1883, and in 1907 she became the first woman to receive the Order of Merit, an honor that was as rare as a solar eclipse in Victorian England. Yet, she remained humble, more interested in the impact of her work than in accolades. Florence Nightingale's later years were a whirlwind of reform, correspondence, and stubborn determination. She was a woman who refused to let anything stand in the way of her mission, not even her own failing health. Her story is a testament to the power of one determined individual to change the course of history. As we continue to unravel the layers of her life, it's clear that her influence was as far-reaching as it was profound. And as the legend of the Lady with the Lamp continues to captivate the world, we remember that it was the woman behind the lamp who truly lit the way forward. Florence Nightingale's legacy isn't just a dusty relic for history buffs to dust off at cocktail parties. It's a living testament to the power of vision and tenacity in the face of adversity. Let's talk about the real Florence, who managed to leave an indelible mark on the world, not just as a mythic figure with a lamp, but as a groundbreaker in healthcare. Her work laid the foundation for modern medical practices, a fact that's as undeniable as the presence of traffic on a Monday morning. First, let's debunk the myth that Nightingale was just a gentle nurse. Sure, she had the bedside manner of a saint when needed, but beneath that calm exterior was a data-crunching powerhouse. She was the Steve Jobs of her day, minus the turtleneck, using her statistical prowess to make healthcare more efficient. Her famous coxcomb charts weren't just pretty to look at. They were a wake-up call to the British government, highlighting the grim reality that sanitation, or lack thereof, was the real enemy in hospitals. This wasn't just a matter of aesthetics, it was life or death. By showing that disease was the true wartime killer, she made sanitary reform impossible to ignore, a bit like trying to overlook a pink elephant in the room. Her impact on nursing, monumental. Before Florence, nursing was about as respected as a used car salesman at a luxury car convention. She turned it into a profession of dignity and respect, demanding rigorous training and ethical standards. The Nightingale Training School for Nurses, established at St. Thomas Hospital, was more than just an educational institution. It was a beacon of change, pumping out trained nurses like a well-oiled machine. By 1901, the school had trained over 3,000 nurses, who were then dispatched like healthcare missionaries to improve hospital standards worldwide. If you've ever had a nurse who knew what they were doing, and let's hope you have, you've got Florence to thank. Economically, her reforms were a game changer. The British government's purse strings were tighter than a Victorian corset, yet Nightingale managed to pry them open by proving that prevention was more cost-effective than cure. Her cost-benefit analyses were ahead of their time, showing that every pound spent on cleaning up hospitals could save multiple pounds in reduced mortality rates. She essentially turned healthcare into a fiscal no-brainer, which is no small feat considering how governments often struggle with logic. In the grand tapestry of public health, Nightingale's threads are unmistakable. Consider the fact that she was instrumental in the establishment of what would become the National Health Service in the UK, albeit indirectly. Her emphasis on preventive care, sanitation, and trained nursing staff laid the groundwork for a healthcare system that aimed to be accessible to all, not just those who could afford it. It's the sort of visionary thinking that makes you wonder why she wasn't awarded more than just a couple of royal honours. Now, let's pivot to her complex character. Nightingale wasn't just a one-note humanitarian. She was as multifaceted as a diamond. On one hand, she was a compassionate caregiver. On the other, a relentless reformer who wouldn't take no for an answer. Her correspondence with government officials was a masterclass in strategic persuasion, full of charm and subtle pressure. She was a feminist before the term was even coined, advocating for women's rights and education with a fervor that left many of her male contemporaries quaking in their boots. Despite her achievements, Nightingale was not without her critics. Some saw her as an overbearing reformer, sticking her nose into places it didn't belong. But that was the point. She knew change didn't happen by waiting politely for an invitation. Her tenacity was both her greatest asset and the source of friction with the establishment. Yet, it's this very stubbornness that ensured her ideas took root, growing into the modern healthcare principles we often take for granted today. Fast forward to the present, and you'll find that her principles are as relevant as ever. In an age where pandemics can spread faster than gossip in a small town, her focus on sanitation and hygiene is crucial. Her work is a reminder that healthcare isn't just about treating illness, but preventing it. It's about a holistic approach that considers both the patient and the environment, a lesson that echoes louder than ever in our current global health landscape. Florence Nightingale's story doesn't end with her passing in 1910. It continues to influence how healthcare is practiced around the world. Her legacy is a quilt of innovation, compassion, and unyielding resolve, each patch a testament to her life's work. She showed us that true change often requires defying conventions, and that the most extraordinary achievements can come from the most unexpected places. So, as you ponder the lamp-wielding lady who once roamed the dismal halls of Scutari, remember that the real light she brought was the illumination of knowledge and reform. Her story is a testament to the power of one determined individual to alter the course of history. And with that, the lesson comes full circle, because in the end, Florence Nightingale wasn't just a beacon in the darkness. She was a blazing force for change, lighting the way for generations to come. Let's talk about a civilization that built remarkable structures without the benefit of modern tools. No cranes, no bulldozers, and believe it or not even metal tools. Yes, folks, we're diving into the architectural prowess of the Mayans, the original masters of the Stone Age building game. These guys were crafting monumental cities when the rest of the world was still figuring out how to make a decent mud hut. First off, let's address the big question. How did the Mayans, wielding tools that were basically the equivalent of sharpened rocks, manage to build structures that have outlasted many of today's concrete jungles? The answer, my friends, is in their innovative use of materials and techniques. Forget steel beams and reinforced concrete. The Mayans were all about limestone, wood, and a little thing called ingenuity. Limestone was their bread and butter, plentiful, easy to carve when freshly quarried, and capable of hardening into a stone as durable as your grandma's fruitcake. The Mayans employed a construction technique known as the corbel arch. Think of it as an ancient version of the don't worry, it'll hold approach. They stacked stones gradually closer together until they met at the top. It wasn't the Roman arch, but it did the job, and the fact that many of these structures are still standing is a testament to their effectiveness. Take the Temple of the Inscriptions in Paling, for instance. Standing proud at over 20 meters tall is not just a testament to their architectural prowess, but also their love for building tall. Seriously, the Mayans were the skyscraper aficionados of the ancient world, and their obsession with pyramids was like our modern-day obsession with building the next tallest tower. Let's not gloss over the fact that these pyramids were more than just architectural showpieces. They were the centerpieces of Mayan cities, serving as tombs, platforms for temples, and a constant reminder of the gods' watchful eyes. You could call them a blend of practicality and spirituality, with a dash of look what we can build thrown in for good measure. Now, before you get too starry-eyed about the mystical Mayan pyramids, let's splash a little cold water on the romance. These structures weren't just about reaching for the heavens, they were also about power. You see, in the cutthroat world of Mayan politics, building bigger and better was a way of showing who was boss. Want to be the top dog in Mayan society? Better have a pyramid to prove it. Rulers commissioned these grand structures to legitimize their reign, leaving behind a legacy cemented in stone, and giant blocks of limestone at that. It's also worth noting that the labor force behind these architectural marvels wasn't exactly working out of the goodness of their hearts. The Mayan elite didn't pick up chisels and get to work themselves. Instead, they relied on a workforce that was, let's say, strongly encouraged to participate. But hey, at least the workers got to be part of building history, right? We also have to give a nod to the Mayans' adept use of urban planning. These weren't haphazardly thrown together collections of buildings. Nope, the Mayans were meticulous planners. They designed city layouts with plazas, courtyards, and causeways, all strategically arranged to promote airflow and provide shade, essential in the sweltering heat of Central America. Cities like Tikal, with its towering temples and sprawling layout, were the ancient world's version of a modern-day metropolis, minus the traffic jams. Now, let's circle back to the Mayan pyramids, because honestly, who doesn't love a good pyramid? The granddaddy of them all is El Castillo at Chichen Itza, with 365 steps, one for each day of the year. It's a calendar you can climb. And when the sun hits just right during the spring and autumn equinoxes, the shadow of a serpent slithers down the side. It's like the ancient version of a light show, minus the electric bill. But don't be fooled into thinking these structures were just about aesthetics or clever stone stacking. The Mayans were also keen on acoustics. Stand at the base of El Castillo and clap your hands. The echo that comes back sounds like the chirp of a quetzal bird, a sacred animal to the Mayans. It's architectural karaoke, ancient style. In essence, Mayan architecture was about more than just building big. It was about blending functionality with symbolism, practicality with prestige. Their structures reflected their beliefs, their power, and their ingenuity. And while the civilization may have faded, their architectural legacy continues to stand tall, literally. So next time you see a skyscraper piercing the sky, remember the Mayans were doing it first, without cranes, without steel, and definitely without a Starbucks on every corner. Their cities were vibrant centers of life, culture, and innovation, all carved out of the jungle with little more than stone tools and a lot of determination. Sure, they didn't have the internet, but they knew how to build a city that would last. And if that's not impressive, I don't know what is. Now, moving from lofty pyramids to the gritty realities on the ground, let's dive into the economic and social engines that powered the Mayan architectural machine. Forget the romantic notion of artists toiling away with passion and a chisel. This was ancient Central America's version of a booming economy, minus the stark market crashes and Wall Street shenanigans. The Mayans had a knack for transforming their natural resources into architectural wonders, and their economy was the secret source behind this transformation. Let's talk trade. The Mayans weren't just isolated in their jungle cities, hoping for a miracle supply drop. No, they were active players in a vast trade network stretching from present-day Mexico to Honduras. This network was the Amazon prime of the ancient world, delivering goods like obsidian from the highlands and jade from the Tagore River Valley. And while they weren't trading stocks, they did know the value of currency, literally. Cocoa beans often played the role of money, making chocolate not just a treat but a treasure. The big-ticket item for the Mayan economy, salt. That's right, the humble seasoning that now sits forgotten on your dining table was the ancient equivalent of oil. Essential for preserving food. Salt was a staple in trade, with the northern Yucatan Peninsula being a major producer. It's no wonder the region became an economic powerhouse, with salt ensuring the Mayans' meals didn't taste like disappointment. But let's not forget agriculture. Maize was the lifeblood of the Mayan diet and economy, with fields sprawling like ancient green carpets across their territories. This wasn't just subsistence farming, folks. The Mayans developed impressive agricultural techniques, including raised fields and terracing, to maximize productivity. In the swamplands, they crafted chinampas, artificial islands that were essentially floating gardens. Think of them as the original hydroponic farms, minus the hipster farmers market. So, who was responsible for turning these blueprints into reality? Enter the labor force. It's time to debunk another myth. Mayan cities weren't built by slaves. Instead, the workforce was composed of a combination of skilled artisans, farmers during the off-season, and commoners fulfilling their civic duties. It was less about whips and chains, more about communal responsibility, with a dash of coercion. The Mayan elite, ever the savvy politicians, convinced their subjects that building a temple was akin to securing a spot in the afterlife's VIP section. Speaking of the elite, let's not kid ourselves. They weren't just sitting around in feathered headdresses, hoping for divine inspiration. These rulers were the project managers of their day, orchestrating vast construction efforts with the kind of precision that would make a modern-day contractor weep. Leaders like Kainish Janab Pakal of Palenque, who reigned for an impressive 68 years, didn't just build monuments, they built legacies. Pakal's tomb, nestled within the temple of the inscriptions, is a limestone love letter to his reign, complete with intricate carvings and a sarcophagus that's practically a work of art. Now, onto the topic of urban planning. The Mayans were the ancient city planners who put Sim City enthusiasts to shame. Mayan cities were laid out with the kind of foresight that would make urban developers green with envy. They weren't just throwing darts at a map. Instead, cities like Capan were designed with astronomical precision, aligning structures with celestial events. Temples and plazas were oriented to the solstices and equinoxes, transforming cityscapes into cosmic calendars. Water management was another area where the Mayans excelled. In an environment where the rainy season was as predictable as a soap opera plot twist, the Mayans constructed reservoirs and cisterns to capture and store precious water. In Tikal, for example, they engineered a system of canals and reservoirs capable of sustaining the city's population even during dry spells. It's like they took a look at the jungle and said, "Challenge accepted." But let's not gloss over the cost of all this development. The environmental toll was significant, as deforestation and soil depletion crept in like unwelcome guests at a party. The Mayans' hunger for resources led to a kind of ancient ecological crisis. While they mastered the art of urban living, the strain on the land began to show. It's a sobering reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can overlook the limits of their resources. And what about the social dynamics? The Mayan social pyramid was as carefully constructed as their stone structures. At the top sat the Ajor, or ruler, whose power was both political and religious. Below them, a class of nobles, priests, and scribes who kept the gears of bureaucracy turning. At the foundation were the commoners, the backbone of Mayan society, laboring in the fields and quarries to support the upper echelon's grand ambitions. These societal layers were held together by a shared belief system that wove religion into every aspect of life. The Mayan pantheon was as crowded as a holiday shopping mall, with guards for everything from rain to maize. Rituals were a common occurrence, often held in the very plazas and pyramids that defined their cities. It was a spiritual quid pro quo. The gods demanded devotion, and in return they ensured prosperity. Or at least that was the plan. As we peel back the layers of Mayan society, it's clear that their architectural achievements were not just the result of skilled craftsmanship, but the product of a complex web of economic, social, and religious factors. Their cities were not mere collections of impressive buildings. They were living, breathing entities sustained by the blood, sweat, and faith of their inhabitants. So, the next time you marvel at a Mayan temple, remember, behind the grandeur lies a story of human ingenuity, ambition, and the eternal dance between man and nature. And while we've only scratched the surface, rest assured there's more to uncover in this tale of stone and spirit. Keep those metaphorical shovels at the ready, because we're just getting started. Now, as we delve deeper into the Mayan architectural genius, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer brainpower behind their constructions. We're talking about mathematics and astronomy that would make Pythagoras do a double take. The Mayans weren't just stacking stones willy-nilly. They were essentially the ancient world's Einsteins, minus the wild hair and theoretical physics. First, let's tackle the myth that the Mayans had some kind of extraterrestrial help. It's a charming notion, aliens swooping in to lend a hand with temple building because they were just so impressed by human potential. But let's get real. The Mayans were perfectly capable of figuring things out on their own. Thank you very much. Their understanding of astronomy and mathematics was so advanced, it often seems otherworldly. But here's the kicker. They did it with nothing more than keen observation and a knack for numbers. Start with their astronomical prowess. The Mayans were essentially the neighborhood stargazers who took their hobby a bit too seriously. They meticulously aligned their temples with celestial bodies, turning their cities into massive timekeepers. Take the Karakal Observatory at Chichen Itza, for instance. This wasn't just a place to gaze at stars. It was a structure designed with precise alignments to track Venus, the sun, and other celestial phenomena, with an accuracy that would make modern astronomers nod in respect. How did they achieve this? Enter the Mayan calendar system. Forget your smartphone calendar app. The Mayans had a complex system that put our Gregorian calendar to shame. They used a combination of the Tzolk'in, a 260-day ceremonial calendar, and the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar, meshing them into a neat cycle that reset every 52 years. This system allowed them to predict solar eclipses, lunar cycles, and planetary movements with a precision that would have NASA engineers double-checking their calculations. But wait, there's more. The Mayans also whipped up the concept of zero independently, a mathematical breakthrough that Europe wouldn't catch on to until centuries later. Zero, folks. That's the number you don't think about until you realize how much you need it. This wasn't just about keeping score in a game of ancient tic-tac-toe. It was the foundation for complex calculations, calendar corrections, and even tax assessments. Yes, even back then, you couldn't escape taxes. Now, let's talk about their architectural piece de resistance, the corbel arch. It's easy to underestimate this humble structure, but to the Mayans, it was a game changer. The Romans might have perfected the true arch, but the Mayans took a different route. They piled stones in a slightly haphazard, gravity-defying fashion that somehow managed to stay up. It's like Jenga, but with a lot more riding on it than the humiliation of a tower collapse. And while the corbel arch might not have the elegance of its Roman counterpart, it was a sturdy solution that worked with the materials the Mayans had on hand. The arch allowed them to create large interior spaces, critical for their ceremonial centers and palaces. Structures like the palace of the governor in Uxmal showcase the beauty and practicality of this technique, with a span that seems to defy logic. And yet it stands, centuries later, as a testament to their engineering skills. But why did they go through all this trouble? Well, here's the unvarnished truth. Beyond the aesthetic and spiritual reasons, these constructions were about power and prestige. If you were a Mayan ruler, having a temple that synced up with the stars wasn't just a cool party trick. It was a statement of divine right and authority. Aligning your reign with celestial events showed you were in tune with the cosmos, thus legitimizing your rule. It was the ultimate power move, like a medieval king waving around the Holy Grail. Yet, let's not forget the practical side of things. Understanding the movements of the heavens was vital for agriculture, and the Mayans were nothing if not practical when it came to feeding their people. Knowing when the rainy season was coming meant the difference between a bountiful harvest and a famine. Their architectural alignments were not just spiritual expressions, but essential tools for survival. Now, why does this matter today? Because in a world obsessed with progress and technology, the Mayans remind us of the power of observation and ingenuity. They didn't have computers, but they managed to build cities that were marvels of planning and execution. They didn't have complex machinery, but they created structures that still stand. It's a reminder that sometimes the best tools are the simplest ones, and that human creativity is the ultimate resource. So next time you gaze up at the night sky, remember that you're seeing what the Mayans saw, a celestial blueprint that guided their lives and shaped their world. And while we might have swapped star charts for GPS, the quest to understand our place in the universe remains the same. History is full of echoes, and the Mayans were among the first to listen and build accordingly. As we continue to explore the brilliance of Mayan construction, keep this in mind. Their achievements were not just about stone and mortar, but about a worldview that connected the earth to the stars and back again. We've only just begun to uncover the layers of their genius, so stay tuned as we dive deeper into the next chapter of this incredible saga. There's still plenty of jungle to hack through, both metaphorically and literally. As we continue to unravel the layers of Mayan genius, let's plunge into the power plays and cultural theatrics that went on behind those limestone facades. You see, Mayan architecture wasn't just about scratching a creative itch. It was a high-stakes game of thrones, pre-Columbian style. When it came to monumental architecture, the Mayan elite understood the art of propaganda better than a modern political campaign manager. So why did Mayan rulers invest so heavily in these grand constructions? Simple. They were crafting their legacy one stone at a time. Imagine being a king and knowing that your reign will only be as memorable as the size of your pyramid. In this ancient world, the bigger your temple, the more divine your rule. It was all about showing the guards and your subjects that you had celestial backing. And let's face it, nothing says, "I'm closer to the gods," quite like a massive pyramid piercing the jungle canopy. Take the city-state of Tikal, for example. By the 8th century, it was a bustling metropolis with over 45,000 inhabitants. Its rulers weren't shy about flaunting their architectural dominance. They were like the Bezos or Musk of their day, continually pushing the limits of what could be built. The Great Jaguar Temple, standing at 47 meters tall, wasn't just a place of worship. It was a colossal "I'm in charge" sign, visible for miles. These structures served as a constant reminder of the ruler's divine favor and accomplished what no press release ever could. But it wasn't all smooth sailing in this architectural arms race. Let's debunk the myth that these projects were harmonious community endeavors. In reality, they were more like ancient Kickstarter campaigns with rulers as the relentless project managers. And the stakes? Well, they were as high as the temples themselves. Building projects often became the focal point of political power struggles, with rival city-states competing to outdo each other. You could almost hear the silent one-upmanship echoing through the rainforest. "Oh, you built a temple that touches the sky. How quaint. Our next project will tickle the stars." This competition wasn't just about bragging rights, either. It had very real political implications. A city with grander architecture attracted more trade and talent, bolstering its economy, and by extension, its ruler. And let's not ignore the religious context. These structures were seen as earthly manifestations of the cosmic order. The more aligned your city was with celestial events, the more it resonated with divine power. It was like having the Vatican, Wall Street, and Hollywood all rolled into one. But while rulers were busy polishing their divine credentials, the common folk were sweating it out in the quarries and construction sites. The labor force was a mix of skilled artisans and everyday citizens fulfilling their civic duty. Think of it as jury duty, but with a lot more heavy lifting and a little less sitting around. These workers weren't just building a city, they were crafting a shared identity. The laborers were well aware that each stone laid was a testament to their collective strength and resilience. And while they didn't get their names etched into history, their handiwork has certainly stood the test of time. Now, I'd be remiss not to mention the cultural motivations behind this architectural zeal. The Mayan rulers were not just building for the present, they were crafting a narrative for the ages. Architecture was their medium, and legacy was the message. In an oral culture where stories were passed down generations, these stone behemoths were eternal storytellers. Each carved stone was like a tweet from the past, proclaiming the ruler's achievements, victories, and divine favor. It was ancient PR at its finest, with each temple acting as a billboard in the grand theater of Mayan life. But here's the twist. This architectural legacy wasn't just for the living. It was also for the afterlife. The Mayans believed that the gods would judge them based on the earthly accomplishments they left behind. So, rulers weren't just thinking about their next political win. They were considering their eternal resume. It was a bit like trying to get into the Ivy League of the cosmos, where your GPA was your pyramid's height, and extra credit came in the form of intricate carvings. And while we're on the topic of myth-busting, let's address the notion that these rulers were universally loved and admired. Sure, they were seen as semi-divine figures, but that didn't mean everyone was thrilled about their building projects. The commoners were likely more concerned with the next harvest than the next temple. Yet, the rulers understood that architecture had the power to unite or divide, to inspire awe or incite rebellion. A well-timed building project could stabilize a ruler's reign, while a poorly executed one could lead to unrest. It was the ancient equivalent of playing political chess, with each stone a calculated move. In this architectural arms race, some city-states thrived while others faltered. The ambitious building projects required vast resources, and not every city could sustain this level of expenditure. The competition could be cutthroat, with alliances formed and broken over the promise of architectural supremacy. This wasn't a friendly neighborhood bake sale. It was a high-stakes game where the prize was nothing less than political and spiritual dominance. And let's not forget the environmental cost. The insatiable demand for resources led to deforestation and soil depletion, issues that would eventually contribute to the decline of many city-states. It's a classic tale of human ambition outpacing sustainability, a narrative that echoes through history like a haunting refrain. So, as we marvel at these architectural wonders, let's take a moment to appreciate the complex web of motivations behind them. They were not just stone structures. They were the embodiment of power, faith, and ambition. Each pyramid and temple was a chapter in the ongoing saga of human ingenuity and folly. And while the Mayan civilization may have faded, their architectural legacy remains a testament to the enduring human spirit. As we wrap up this exploration, remember that the story of the Mayans is far from over. There's still more to uncover about their incredible achievements, and the next time you find yourself staring at a Mayan ruin, think of it not just as a relic of the past, but as a message from a civilization that dared to dream big. Stay tuned, because we've got more ground to cover in this epic tale of stone, spirit, and survival. And so, we find ourselves at the climax of the Mayan saga, where the grandeur of their architecture meets the gritty realities of environmental collapse and political turmoil. Imagine the Mayan civilization like a high-stakes poker game, where they kept raising the stakes with every temple and pyramid, only to realize too late that they were running out of chips, those chips being their natural resources and social cohesion. It was a classic case of pushing the planet to its limits, and when Mother Nature finally folded, she took the Mayans down with her. Let's talk about the environmental hurdles that tripped up this architectural powerhouse. The Mayans were masters of their domain, but that domain was not exactly a forgiving partner. Central America's lush jungles and swamps were a double-edged sword, fertile for agriculture, but ruthless in their demands. By the 9th century, deforestation was the silent enemy lurking behind every stone facade. The need for timber to fuel their lime kilns and clear lands for agriculture left the landscape looking a bit like a balding head, patchy and struggling. And then there's the climate. It's as unpredictable as your favorite soap opera, with plot twists in the form of prolonged droughts. The Mayans relied heavily on seasonal rains to fill their reservoirs and sustain their agricultural endeavors. But when the skies refused to cooperate, famine was just around the corner. The droughts that hit during the Terminal Classic period, around 800-900 AD, were like the ultimate plot twist nobody saw coming. It's hard to maintain a thriving civilization when you're locked in a perpetual game of will it or won't it rain. But the environment wasn't the only villain in this tale. The Mayan society was as complex as its architecture, and when cracks began to show in their carefully constructed social order, things started to crumble faster than a dry limestone block. You see, the Mayan city-states were a bit like rival high schools in an 80s teen movie, each trying to outshine the other, but without the benefit of a heartwarming musical number to bring everyone together in the end. This fierce competition drained resources and strained alliances, leaving city-states vulnerable to both internal strife and external threats. Politics was a blood sport in the Mayan world, with rulers navigating a treacherous landscape of shifting allegiances and ambitious rivals. When the going was good, leaders like Kayanish Yaks Kayak Mo of Kapan could bask in the glory of their monumental achievements. But when things turned sour, the same monumental edifices became stark reminders of overreach and hubris. The rulers' focus on grandiose projects sometimes left them blind to the cracks forming beneath their feet, both literally and metaphorically. And let's not sugarcoat the social dynamics. The commoners, who formed the backbone of Mayan labor, were not exactly living the high life. As resources dwindled and the pressure to support lavish projects increased, so did social unrest. The discontent simmered like a pot ready to boil over. Imagine being asked to build yet another temple while your crops withered under a relentless sun. It was a recipe for revolt, and the pot eventually boiled over. As the political landscape fractured, the once mighty cities began to fall like dominoes. Tikal, Kapan, and Palang all succumbed to their own unique blend of environmental hardship and political miscalculation. By the end of the 10th century, many of the grand cities were abandoned, left to be reclaimed by the jungle they had once dominated. The Mayan civilization retreated into smaller, more manageable settlements, leaving behind the ghostly ruins of a bygone era. But let's not end on a note of despair. The Mayan architectural legacy is anything but a tragic tale. Their innovations continue to inspire awe and admiration, even today. The corbel arch, for instance, might not have been the most elegant solution, but it was a testament to human ingenuity and adaptation. Their urban planning, oriented to celestial events, laid the groundwork for future generations to consider the symbiotic relationship between architecture and the natural world. And while we're on the subject of legacies, let's talk about the modern appreciation of Mayan architecture. These ruins are not just tourist destinations. They are open-air museums showcasing the pinnacle of human creativity and resilience. Contemporary architects draw inspiration from Mayan designs, recognizing the importance of sustainability and harmony with nature. In an age where environmental concerns are front and center, the Mayan story serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. In the end, the Mayans remind us of the delicate balance between ambition and sustainability, power and responsibility. Their monumental achievements were as much about human potential as they were about human folly. As we stand amidst the ruins, it's a humbling experience to realize that these ancient stones were once the epicenter of a vibrant civilization, now whispering their stories to those willing to listen. So the next time you marvel at a skyscraper or a sprawling metropolis, take a moment to reflect on the Mayans, who reached for the stars with nothing more than stone tools and sheer determination. Their story is etched in stone, a testament to the enduring spirit of human innovation, and a reminder that while civilizations may rise and fall, their legacies can stand the test of time. If you were to name the ancient civilization that could out-stargaze the rest of Mesoamerica, you'd be talking about the Olmecs. These folks were the original celestial hipsters of the region, charting the heavens while everyone else was still trying to figure out how to spell telescope. But before you go imagining them as a bunch of mystical astronomers with pointy hats and robes, let's get one thing straight. The Olmecs were more likely to be found in a loincloth than a wizard's cloak. What's fascinating about the Olmecs is their role as the granddaddy of all Mesoamerican civilizations. We're talking about a society that kicked things off around 1500 BCE, long before the Aztecs and Mayans were even a twinkle in history's eye. They set up shop in the tropical lowlands, of what is now southern Mexico, and their heartland was centered around places like San Lorenzo and La Venta. Think of them as the original influencers of the region, leaving behind colossal stone heads that would make any Easter Island statue green with envy. Now, when it comes to astronomy, the Olmecs had quite the knack for it. But let's not fall into the trap of thinking they had some sort of sci-fi genius at play. No, they didn't have UFOs or laser beams, but what they did have was an impressive understanding of the night sky, achieved through sheer observation and a bit of ingenious thinking. Their celestial prowess likely began with watching the sun, moon, and stars, which, let's face it, is what happens when your entertainment options are limited to bonfires and storytelling. The Olmecs weren't just staring at the sky for kicks, though. They were calculating the movements of celestial bodies, and this wasn't just an idle pastime. It was crucial for agriculture, religion, and even their political structure. You could say their cosmic curiosity was written in the stars. There's a certain romantic myth that paints the Olmecs as mysterious, otherworldly geniuses. While it's tempting to think they picked up their skills from visiting Martians, the reality is both simpler and more impressive. They were incredibly observant and used tools like siding devices and shadow-casting stones to track celestial events. This was pragmatic science, folks, not magic. In practical terms, this knowledge allowed the Olmecs to develop a calendar system that was vital for agricultural cycles. Imagine knowing exactly when to plant and harvest your crops because you could predict the rainy season. That's not just handy, it's life-saving. The Olmecs were essentially the Silicon Valley of their time, innovating in ways that had tangible impacts on their society. So why does this matter? Well, the Olmecs laid the groundwork for future Mesoamerican civilizations, who would take these astronomical insights and run with them, reaching new heights of sophistication. Without the Olmecs, you might not have the Mayan calendar or the Aztec sun stone. And then where would 2012 conspiracy theorists get their material? It's easy to get swept up in the myths, but the truth is that the Olmecs were simply a society that figured out how to make the heavens work for them. They didn't have the benefit of modern tech, but they had something just as powerful, the ability to watch, learn, and adapt. And if that's not genius, I don't know what is. So next time you look up at the stars, maybe give a nod to the Olmecs, the original sky watchers who, without a doubt, knew how to keep their heads in the clouds. And let's not forget that keeping your head in the clouds wasn't just a hobby for the Olmecs. It was practically a job requirement. The Olmecs were the original time lords of Mesoamerica, and yes, they had calendar systems to prove it. Now, before you roll your eyes thinking, oh great, another ancient civilization with a calendar, let me clarify. These guys were the trailblazers. They didn't just mark a few holidays and call it a day. They crafted a system that became the cornerstone for later Mesoamerican societies. The Olmec calendar was a dual-system operation, like having both Google Calendar and a paper planner. Because, you know, redundancy is key. On one hand, they had the 260-day sacred calendar, known as the Tzolk'in by the Mayans who followed in their footsteps. This wasn't some arbitrary number. It was integral to their religious ceremonies and social events, kind of like how we schedule weddings or Taco Tuesdays. The sacred calendar was divided into 13 cycles of 20 days each, creating a system that was both spiritually significant and practical for agricultural cycles. Then, there was the 365-day solar calendar, similar to what we know today, but with a twist. This harb, again a term coined by the Mayans, was made up of 18 months of 20 days each, plus a 5-day period considered to be a sort of cosmic timeout. Think of it as the universe's way of saying, take a breather, folks, things might get weird. These 5 days were called the Way-eb, and were often associated with misfortune, like the ancient version of Mercury retrograde, but with potentially more serious consequences than just losing emails. But why were these calendars such a big deal? Well, the Olmecs weren't just ticking days off a cosmic countdown. They used these calendars to synchronize their agriculture with the whims of Mother Nature. This was crucial, because missing your planting season could mean the difference between a bumper crop and starvation. Remember, these were the days before you could run to the nearest Whole Foods if your corn didn't come in. In the economic context of the Olmecs, agriculture was the backbone of their society. They cultivated crops like maize, corn, beans, and squash, the holy trinity of Mesoamerican agriculture. Keeping track of when the rains would come or when the dry season would begin required celestial precision. This wasn't just an exercise in academic curiosity. It was about survival, baby. And trust me, when your livelihood depends on it, you'd better believe they were obsessive about marking time. Religion, too, played a starring role in their calendar fixation. The Olmecs were a deeply spiritual bunch, with guards and rituals woven into the very fabric of daily life. The calendar dictated when religious ceremonies should take place, aligning their earthly actions with the divine timetable. This wasn't a matter of simply appeasing the gods. It was about maintaining cosmic harmony. Basically, if the Olmecs missed a ceremony, it wasn't just a social faux pas. It could upset the balance of the universe. No pressure, right? Now, let's debunk a myth while we're here. The romantic notion that the Olmecs were somehow slaves to their calendars, living in fear of cosmic repercussions. Sure, there was an element of anxiety. Who wouldn't be nervous about a potential apocalypse? But the reality is they were incredibly pragmatic. Their calendars were tools, not tyrants. They used them to predict solar eclipses, plan agricultural tasks, and organize societal events. They were more like a well-oiled machine than a doomsday clock. The Olmecs' dedication to timekeeping was so intense you might say they were the original deadline junkies. Forget about missing a meeting or a launch date. These folks were worried about missing celestial alignments that could affect their entire society. And while it might sound like a lot of pressure, it was this very obsession that allowed them to thrive. So next time you're late for a meeting because you forgot to set a reminder, just remember the Olmecs. They didn't have digital alerts or calendar apps, yet they managed to keep up with the cosmos and run a successful civilization. Theirs was a world where the stars dictated life, and they made sure to stay on schedule, cosmos be damned. And thus, as we delve deeper into the Olmec story, let's keep in mind that their calendar systems weren't just about counting days. They were about making every moment count. As we continue, we'll unravel more layers of this fascinating society, exploring how their innovations laid the groundwork for future civilizations to build upon. So stick around, because the Olmec tale is far from over, and we've got plenty more cosmic deadlines to meet. As the Olmecs continued their celestial dance, they didn't just stop at calendars. These ancient maestros took their love of the skies and channeled it into the very earth they walked on. Enter La Venta's Great Pyramid, a veritable mountain of mystery and a testament to their architectural prowess. This towering structure is believed to have been built around 900 BCE and rises about 34 meters above the coastal plains. If you're trying to picture it, think of it as the Olmecs' version of the Empire State Building, albeit made of clay and earth rather than steel and glass. But don't let its humble materials fool you. This was no mud hut. The Great Pyramid wasn't just an oversized dirt pile. It was a carefully constructed piece of astronomical architecture. Here's where it gets cosmic. Many researchers believe it was aligned to correspond with celestial events. Think of it as the ancient precursor to your favorite stargazing app. But instead of swiping through constellations, you'd have to climb up and squint at the sky. The pyramid's layout might have been aligned with the cardinal directions, which helped the Olmecs in their calendar keeping and agricultural planning, allowing them to synchronize their activities with the cycles of the sun and stars. Of course, this wasn't just about farming efficiency. The Olmecs were savvy enough to know that aligning monumental architecture with the cosmos wasn't just practical, it was powerful. It gave them an aura of divine authority, a cosmic stamp of approval, if you will. Imagine the political clout in being able to say, "The stars are on my side." This kind of celestial alignment was a way to legitimize power, merging the earthly and the divine in an impressive show of astropolitical theater. But let's not get too carried away with the romantic image of an ancient civilization with magic powers. The Olmecs didn't have some ancient version of a supercomputer calculating the stars' every move. They weren't hiding an ancient GPS in their loincloths, sadly. No, what they had was a deep, observational understanding of their environment. They used the tools available to them, simple yet effective, to read the sky like a seasoned astrologer reads a horoscope. And speaking of tools, let's debunk the myth of the so-called astronomical calculators. It's easy to imagine some ancient Indiana Jones stumbling upon a dusty, stone contraption, a Mesoamerican version of a TI-84 graphing calculator, if you will. But the Olmecs didn't need gadgets or gizmos. They had their own eyes and a keen sense of observation. Shadows cast by the sun, the changing positions of stars, and the lunar cycles were their guides. They turned the world into a giant classroom, learning through patient observation and a hefty dose of trial and error. Sure, it might sound less glamorous than owning a mystical device, but let's give credit where it's due. The Olmecs were the original data analysts, compiling centuries of celestial observations into a coherent system. Talk about dedication. In an era where modern technology would have been as unfathomable as a unicorn, their achievements were nothing short of remarkable. But what about the economic nuts and bolts of all this stargazing? To build something as grand as La Venta's Great Pyramid, you'd need resources, both human and material. This wasn't just a weekend DIY project. The Olmecs organized a labor force capable of moving thousands of tons of earth and clay, a task that would have required a solid understanding of logistics, management, and perhaps a motivational speech or two. And let's not forget the economic implications. Such construction projects likely required surplus resources, which means their agriculture must have been pretty darn successful. And therein lies the broader significance of their astronomical endeavors. This wasn't just about looking good for the gods or impressing rival tribes. This was about sustaining life, ensuring prosperity, and maintaining social order. The Olmecs used their celestial knowledge to anticipate agricultural cycles, thereby securing food supplies and stabilizing their economy. They weren't just starry-eyed dreamers. They were practical, forward-thinking strategists who understood that the stars were not just a map of the heavens, but a guide to earthly survival. Of course, this marriage of the spiritual and the practical also highlights a fundamental truth about human nature. We love to find meaning in the stars, whether it's predicting the future or simply understanding our place in the cosmos. The Olmec celestial preoccupation reminds us that while technology evolves, our desire to reach for the stars remains constant. They didn't have the tools we do today, but they understood a fundamental truth, that the universe is a vast, complex system, and that by observing it, we can better understand ourselves. So, as we continue this journey through Olmec history, let's remember that their achievements were not just about building impressive structures or charting the cosmos. They were about survival, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. The Olmecs may have been grounded in the earth, but their eyes were always on the sky, forever seeking to understand the celestial rhythms that governed their world. And in that quest, they laid the foundations for future civilizations to build upon, proving that sometimes looking up is the best way forward. As we explore further, keep in mind that the Olmec story is far from over. There's plenty more to uncover, from their enigmatic art to their mysterious decline. So stay tuned, because our journey through the world of the Olmecs is just getting started. Onward to the next chapter of this ancient tale, where we'll delve even deeper into the mysteries and marvels of this remarkable civilization. And speaking of mysteries and marvels, the Olmec celestial savvy was like a cosmic baton passed down through the generations, ultimately winding up in the hands of the Maya and Aztecs. It's like an ancient version of Whisper Down the Lane, but with star maps instead of whispered secrets. The Olmecs, those original skywatchers, laid the groundwork, and their successors took that celestial knowledge and cranked it up a notch. Let's start with the Maya, those astronomical overachievers who took what the Olmecs started and transformed it into a celestial symphony. By the time they were through, the Maya had developed a calendar so precise it made the Gregorian calendar look like a kid's scribbles. We're talking about a civilization that could pinpoint Venus's cycles to within a day over a period of 584 Earth days. That's some serious star power. The Maya weren't just content with following in the Olmec's footsteps, though. No, they added their own flair, like chefs seasoning a well-handled recipe. While the Olmecs had their 260-day and 365-day calendars, the Maya developed the long count calendar, a system that tracked time in cycles of 125 years. Talk about thinking long-term. Imagine planning your calendar app updates in half-millennia increments, and they weren't just about big numbers. The Maya had their own unique take on celestial architecture. Take the El Castillo Pyramid at Chichen Itza, which doubles as a giant solar calendar. Every equinox, the sun creates a shadow on the pyramid that looks like a serpent slithering down the steps. It's the kind of spectacle that would have had the Olmecs nodding in approval, if they weren't busy checking their own celestial calendars, of course. But the Maya weren't the only ones taking cosmic notes from the Olmecs. Enter the Aztecs, who took the celestial baton and sprinted with it straight into their own brand of astronomical theater. The Aztec sun stone, often mistakenly called a calendar, is more like a cosmic mandala, a representation of their universe complete with deities, eras, and celestial signs. It's a heady mix of mythology and astronomy, like reading a horoscope written by Shakespeare. The Aztecs, for the dramatic showmen, infused their celestial knowledge with a touch of flair. They didn't just observe the heavens, they performed cosmic rituals that would make a Broadway producer jealous. Their new fire ceremony, celebrated every 52 years, was an astronomical reset button, a way to appease the gods and ensure the world's continuation. Picture an entire city taking a collective breath, wondering if they'd see the sun rise again. A celestial cliffhanger, if there ever was one. Now, let's debunk a few myths that have floated around like clouds obscuring the stars. There's a romantic notion that the Maya and Aztecs had some mystical insight into the cosmos that we modern folks just can't grasp. But the reality is they were practical, observational geniuses, much like the Olmecs. They used the tools they had, like shadow casting and alignment with celestial bodies, to create systems that worked. No crystal balls or magic wands, just a whole lot of sky-gazing and note-taking. And while we're on the topic of practicalities, let's not forget the economic undercurrents. The Olmec celestial insights didn't just float off into the ether, they were grounded in earthbound realities. The Maya and Aztecs, like their Olmec predecessors, used their astronomical knowledge to guide agriculture, coordinate trade, and structure religious ceremonies. It was a celestial GPS guiding daily life, ensuring that crops were planted with precision and that cosmic order translated into earthly stability. The Maya, with their complex city-states like Tikal and Kapan, needed this kind of celestial coordination to maintain their sprawling empires. Their agricultural success, based on the cycles of the stars and planets, fed entire populations, allowing their culture to flourish. The economy wasn't just about trading goods, it was about trading knowledge, passing down that Olmec wisdom like a sacred heirloom. And the Aztecs, mighty rulers of Tenochtitlan, elevated this knowledge into a form of statecraft. Their rulers claimed divine right by aligning themselves with celestial phenomena, using the heavens to legitimize their authority. The sun stone wasn't just a calendar, it was a political tool, a testament to their divine connection and their right to rule. Imagine the political debates. Our star alignments are better than yours. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Sure, the Maya and Aztecs built on Olmec foundations, but they also added a healthy dose of human fallibility. The game of celestial telephone wasn't always perfect. Misinterpretations and adaptations led to some cosmic missteps, like when the Maya predicted the end of the world in 2012. Or at least that's what sensationalist headlines would have you believe. The reality was they were marking the end of a cycle, not the universe. It's a bit like confusing the end of December with the end of time. So, as we trace the Olmec's influence through the annals of Mesoamerican history, let's remember that their legacy is written not just in stone, but in the stars. Their celestial knowledge was a seed that grew into a vast canopy of cultural and scientific achievement, a testament to human ingenuity and the eternal quest to understand our place in the cosmos. And while the Olmecs themselves may have faded into history, their impact is as undeniable as a full moon on a clear night. As we look to the skies, it's worth remembering that those ancient sky watchers, with their crude tools and boundless curiosity, laid the groundwork for civilizations that would follow. They showed that while technology may change, the human thirst for knowledge remains a constant. So, as we prepare to dive deeper into the Olmec's enigmatic world, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, where the earth meets the sky, and remember that sometimes the most profound revelations are found in the simplest of observations. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of this remarkable civilization, because the cosmic journey is far from over. As we prepare to dive deeper into the Olmec's enigmatic world, let's keep our eyes on the horizon, where the earth meets the sky, and remember that sometimes the most profound revelations are found in the simplest of observations. So, what does all this mean for us modern sky watchers? tethered as we are to our smartphones, still craning our necks to glimpse a meteor shower or trace the arc of the International Space Station. Well, let's just say the Olmecs' celestial curiosity has left its fingerprints all over the present day. First off, let's talk legacy. The Olmecs' astronomical insights didn't just vanish into the ether like a shooting star. Their celestial observations laid a foundation that would influence cultures long after their own civilization faded. Take the modern Mesoamerican descendants. Many still observe traditional agricultural calendars that echo the Olmec systems. These time-honored methods continue to dictate planting and harvesting in regions where Walmart isn't quite within a stone's throw. Farmers today might not consult the Tzolk'in directly, but the echoes of those ancient cycles still resonate in the rhythms of rural life. But let's not stop at agriculture. The Olmec's celestial legacy has permeated our very understanding of time. Their dual calendar system was a forerunner to the more complex systems developed by the Maya and Aztecs, which in turn influenced the way we've come to parcel out time. So next time you grumble about daylight saving time, spare a thought for those early sky-gazers who started the whole time-keeping trend. They might not have predicted your morning coffee schedule, but they certainly paved the way for how we structure our lives. Now, let's address the elephant in the cosmic room. Did the Olmecs invent the wheel or discover America before Columbus? The short answer is no, but the long answer is way more interesting. The Olmecs didn't invent the wheel as we know it. There's no evidence of chariots racing through the jungles of Veracruz. However, they did create wheeled toys, little clay animals with axles, perhaps as a nod to what could have been. As for discovering America, well, they were certainly here long before Columbus, but so were countless other indigenous cultures. The Olmecs were significant, but let's not rewrite the history books just yet. Speaking of myths, let's debunk another one, the notion that the Olmecs were a mysterious mother culture from which all Mesoamerican knowledge sprang. While they were undoubtedly influential, the idea that they were the sole originators of Mesoamerican civilization is a simplification. The Olmecs were more like the cool older cousin who introduces you to your first rock band. They set the stage, but every culture that followed added its own riffs and solos. Now, in modern times, we've taken the Olmec's celestial curiosity and run with it, building telescopes that can peer into the farthest reaches of the universe. But even as we launch telescopes into space and send rovers to Mars, let's not forget the importance of observation, something the Olmecs excelled at. In a world where everything is measured in pixels and bytes, there's still something to be said for the simple act of looking up and wondering. After all, that's where the Olmecs started, and look at the cosmic journey they set in motion. Today, when we gaze at the stars, we're standing on the shoulders of giants who carved colossal heads out of stone and aligned their pyramids with the cosmos. And perhaps the most enduring part of the Olmecs' legacy is this. Their story reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is a universal human endeavor. From the jungles of Mesoamerica to modern observatories, the quest to understand the stars is as old as civilization itself. In a world where we often look to technology for answers, the Olmecs teach us that sometimes the best insights come from simply observing the world around us. They didn't have satellite imagery or computer models, but they had something equally powerful, a relentless curiosity and the patience to watch, learn, and adapt. It's a lesson as relevant today as it was over 3 millennia ago. So next time you find yourself staring up at the night sky, take a moment to remember those ancient sky watchers in their loincloths, reading the heavens by the flicker of a torch. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity, a reminder that even in the digital age, the answers we seek might just be written in the stars. And with that, we wrap up our celestial journey through the world of the Olmecs, leaving with more questions than answers. But isn't that the beauty of history? It's never truly over. It's just waiting for the next curious mind to look up and wonder.